Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. You have tuned into a special edition Rebel News live stream in which we are going to be covering the latest Conservative Party of Canada leadership debate. I'm David Menzies, and my co-host is none other than Sheila Gunn-Reid, who I believe is coming to us from Calgary today, not Northern Alberta. Is that correct, Sheila?
Absolutely not. I'm not at all in Calgary. I'm not at all in Calgary. I had to cover the Tamara Lich bail hearing this morning, so I wasn't able to attend to Calgary with the rest of our team. But our team is in full force in Calgary. We've got the entire Calgary contingent there, plus Ezra Levant is on the scene.
Yes, the big boss man himself. Well, listen, you cheeky monkey, you fooled me. I thought I was looking at the Rocky Mountains. I thought that was a window, but it's some of that trick whiz-bang photography the kids are always doing. So you're still at home in Northern Alberta. That's okay. Well, Sheila, this is going to be an interesting debate. It is kind of sad that the front runner, Pierre Poilievre, will not be there. Even sadder, in a Coyote Roadrunner kind of context, sneaky Patrick Brown won't be there for reasons we'll get into a little later. But before we do, I think, as usual, you have some housekeeping rules to go over before we get right into the debate.
Sure, I'll do that. So this is, as it is with our usual live streams here on Rebel News, we are streaming on YouTube. If we sort of get into danger zone territory with YouTube censorship, we might have to cut the feed. But this is the leadership debate, so it's going to be pretty safe, I think, although I am co-hosting with David Menzies, so things are always a little unpredictable. But we are also streaming on, Olivia, maybe you can tell me, are we on Getter? Do you know? Okay, so we're on Getter, but we're also on Rumble and Odyssey. And the beauty of Rumble and Odyssey is that they allow you to interact with us in real time and support the work that we do. So you can leave us a paid chat called a Rumble Rant, and we'll read that on air at the end of the debate, because we're going to bring on some of our Calgary friends before the debate starts, and then we're going to watch the debate together, and then we'll read your questions and comments on air at the very end. We'll clean that all up at the end, so stick with us if you want to hear what we have to say. So a Rumble Rant or an Odyssey Hyper Chat are the two ways that you can support the work that we do and get involved in the show.
And Sheila, speaking of the show, what would you say to those out there who might be describing this debate as essentially a nothing burger with fries? Pierre Poilievre, so many people are saying this is no longer a leadership race. It's basically a coronation that comes September 10th. Pierre Poilievre will be crowned leader of the Conservative Party of Canada. And even, Patrick Brown right now is a bit of a caricature. He's kind of like a professional wrestling villain, the guy you love to hate almost. But he won't be there because, as we found out from that bombshell news event very late on Tuesday night, I think it was like the stroke before midnight, yeah. He was unceremoniously turfed for wrongdoings. So when it comes to the Fantastic Four candidates that will be on the podium tonight, is this going to mount to the proverbial hill of beans, Sheila?
Well, yes and no. I think at the same time, because there are fewer people on the stage, we are going to hear more from each one of them. And we're going to see the stark contrast between them. Now, I want to hear more from Leslyn Lewis and Roman Baber, if I'm saying that correctly. I want to hear something that distinguishes them from each other, because I think they agree with each other on almost absolutely everything. And so I'd like to see where those differences are. I also enjoy watching Jean Charest yell at everybody. I don't know. I kind of like how angry he gets. I don't enjoy anything that he says, but his angry face is pretty entertaining for me. And Aitchison, he again, I think he's going to be just sick of everybody and sick of the fact that he's campaigning and sick of the questions. And there's going to be a lot of, look, don't make me turn this minivan around, why can't we all get along? And I appreciate his frustration, but I'd like to see a little bit more life from him. And again, I don't think he fundamentally disagrees with Leslyn Lewis and Roman Baber on very much. I think his approach is a little bit different, but I think we're really going to see just how red Tory-ish Jean Charest is today.
Yeah, and I mean, I have a tremendous amount of respect for candidates like Roman Baber, Leslyn Lewis. I agree with much of what they have to say. Baber, of course, took that incredibly principled stance in standing up to the vaccine mandates of Doug Ford, and he became one of the MPPs in a long litany of MPPs kicked out of caucus with Doug Ford, to Ford's disgrace, I would argue, that you have a supermajority and there's no room for dissent, no room for debate on something so fundamental that affects so many Ontarians. So I do like Roman for that. I think Leslyn Lewis is a terrific candidate. And Jean Charest even, I'm no red Tory, nor am I a fan of red Toryism, which is another reason to cheer the demise of Patrick Brown. But I will say this, Jean Charest shows up to the debates. And also and correct me if I'm wrong, Sheila, unlike some candidates, when it comes to the scrum post-debate, Jean Charest has always been there, even knowing he'll be facing some tough questions. So that earns a degree of respect from me, I got to tell you. Scott Aitkenson, I kind of agree with you. He kind of makes the color beige look like volcano red. It's just, there's nothing he said so far that has grabbed me, that has made me excited, that has made me do a fist pump. You almost have to question what his role is in this leadership. I'm sure he's seventh place in a 6-horse race.
David, I don't want to cut you off here. And I would love to listen to how boring Scott Aitchison is. I actually like boring. That's why I like Stephen Harper. He was as grayish as you can get. But we have someone who's very exciting on the line from Calgary joining us, our boss, whom we should not keep waiting, Ezra Levant.
Hi there, Ezra. David. Hi there. Thanks, you guys, for hosting this live stream. It's great to see you, and it's great to be on this side of the live stream. Normally, I'm in the chair while the reporters are out having fun in the field, whether that's across the country or across the world these days. I'm back in Calgary. I really haven't been traveling a lot in the last 2 years because I've been on the no-fly list because I'm not jabbed. So it's nice to be back in my hometown. I'm in the Petroleum Club, which is a very historical place. It's where a lot of business was done in this town. It tips its hat proudly to the oil and gas and the western roots of the city. So I'm glad that this is where the Western Standard Online, our brother journalists who care about freedom, are hosting their debate. It's a reminder that Calgary stands for something and that there is an ideology behind Westernism and oil and gasism, and it's contrary to the green globalist mindset that we see, for example, in the Netherlands are trying to shut down farming. So I'm glad that the candidates are here. I'm a little bit disappointed from the point of view of a journalist and a viewer that Pierre Poilievre is not going to be here, because I think he's interesting and people want to hear more from him and maybe see him challenged also. Obviously, Patrick Brown's not going to be here because he was disqualified. I can understand why Poilievre decided not to be here. From a strictly pragmatic point of view, what's in it for him? He seems to have a commanding lead in terms of membership sales. He gets all the attention he wants through his produced videos that he rolls out on Facebook or Twitter. So there's no advantage to him coming to basically have other people shoot at him, which is what they would do, rhetorically shoot at him. But from the point of view of a viewer and a critic, it will be lacking the main guy. Like you, I've been listening to your commentary. Like you, I admire Leslyn Lewis, and I like Roman Baber very much. I'm less familiar with Scott Aitchison. And I share David's comments about Jean Charest. Although he is too red for my taste, I like the fact that he's participating, and I like the fact that he's not too snobby to talk to citizen journalists. He's talked to us. And I say that only in that he's not afraid of the media party. Maybe it's because he's a Quebecer. He's not in that Toronto, Ottawa Mean Girls club. So I'm glad he's involved in the debate, even though he certainly wouldn't be my choice. It's nice to be here. And, in another lifetime, 15 years ago, I was the publisher of the Western Standard when it was a paper magazine that we would mail out. That went defunct after about 3 years in the age of the internet. But it's nice to see Derek Fildebrand and his team revive the brand Western Standard and keep some of those early principles from the print edition. Pro-Western, pro-conservative, pro-beef was another part of it. Anyways, it's nice to be here, and I'm having fun already pretending I'm a journalist.
Well, it sure looks like a swank joint you're in there, that Petroleum Club, Ezra. And by the way, I'm sure a lot of people, they're saying this since you flew out of Toronto. What was your experience like getting out of that hellacious place known as Pearson International Airport? Or did, in a cosmic fluke, did things go on time and there were no problems?
It took me 11 hours to get from Toronto to Calgary, which is only slightly less than had I been driving. And I was so desperate to get off the plane, I forgot my suit jacket on the plane, which is why I'm just wearing a shirt today. I apologize for that. But it's not a great time to be flying, and I think that's by design. Remember, Trudeau says, make better choices. Don't use energy. Don't drive. Don't fly. And sure, it's easy to say, no, that's just standard government incompetence. But I think it could well be by design. You'll own nothing, and you'll be happy. You won't fly. You won't have any money, but you'll be happy. You'll do what you're told, and you'll get another jab, or you'll be put on the next no-fly list. I'm worried. I'm flying a little. This is my second time I've flown in the last month because I'm allowed to. I'm worried that'll be shut down again because Trudeau has 400 million doses he bought for 38 million Canadians. That's more than 10 for every man, woman, child, and baby. I think he wants to bring back another mandate because how's he going to get rid of all these doses he bought? But we can put that aside. Listen, I'm glad to be here. And David, you're right. It is a nice building. I don't know if palatious is the right word. It's nice. It's nice. It's sort of
old
luxurious.
Calgary.
Yeah. And I mean, when I grew up in Calgary, I went to college here, and this certainly was a place where politics and business and all the deals were made. But make no mistake about it. The attack on the oil patch by Rachel Notley and the attack on the oil patch by Justin Trudeau, which both coincided in 2015 with the crashing oil prices, that double whammy, and then you add the pandemic on top of it, this city has been punished so hard. Now, oil prices have perked back up, but the vacancy rate in the offices in downtown Calgary is still 30%.
Wow.
30%. I remember when I was a young man here in the 2000s, the vacancy rate was less than 1%. In fact, I remember selling my apartment to a company to use as an office. Like that's how businesses were actually buying residences to convert them into office space. It was so tight. Now we're in the absolute opposite of that. I think that there's a freedom spirit that still lives despite 7 years of attacks by Trudeau, Notley and her legacy that remains. And frankly, Jason Kenney and his lockdownism did no favors to this province either. You not only have the federal leadership race, but you've got the provincial UCP leadership race too. There's a chance for both parties to reboot themselves. I'm hopeful for the feds. I'm not as well informed on the provincial race, but I look forward to learning more about that in the weeks and months ahead.
And
I think, sorry, I'm just going to jump in here, and David, if you wouldn't mind, I think you're probably going to run into some of those UCP leadership candidates at the event tonight, so you might have a chance to quiz them on those things. I know that the Western Standard, initially they had canceled their event and then they rebooted it based on demand. What's it look like in there? Is it filling up? Are there lots of people there?
Well, we came here about an hour early to set up. We've got a lot of our Calgary team here. It's so lovely to see the full deployment of the Rebels Western staff. I have to tell you, it wasn't until my first trip out here a week or so ago that I even met some of our staff for the first time because they couldn't fly east. I couldn't fly west. It's really atrocious what was done to us. So anyhow, the first pleasure for me was seeing our people deploy in such numbers. That's the strength of Rebel News. We have a depth of our bench. So we got here early, and I see people coming in the background now. So it was certainly not full when I was in the building, but that's because we got here an hour early. So I simply don't know because I haven't been in the main auditorium in the last 20 minutes.
Got it.
And Ezra, you mentioned right off the bat, there's one notable candidate missing because of his disqualification, that being Patrick Brown. I think it's going to be highly unlikely, even though he's hired Marie Henein, that pit bull of a criminal lawyer, that he's going to get back into the race, but time will tell. My question to you, my friend, is who do you think of the remaining leadership candidates does the absence of Brown benefit the most?
Well, that's such a good question. I think that Brown was most likely the second place runner, just in terms of his membership sales, his experience in hustling. He's surprised people before when he became the leader of the provincial PCs, when he became the mayor of Brampton, a city with which he had little to do. So even though Pierre Poilievre reportedly outsold him in the membership side, don't count out Patrick Brown's ability to mobilize. So I think that he was the chief risk to Poilievre, and in that sense, it's a benefit to Poilievre he's out. Now, do those Patrick Brown people go somewhere else? Do they go to John Charest? I don't think so either.
Yeah.
I don't think they're actual conservatives. Yeah.
I think they were part of old school Tammany Hall type politics, and when the boss man is out, well, they don't show up for another boss. They're not motivated by the Conservative Party itself. They were motivated by Patrick Brown, and give the man credit for that. And it would be quite something if Pierre Poilievre or Jean Charest or the others had that kind of mobilization. Of course, the reason Patrick Brown is in trouble is allegedly he got this mobilization in sketchy ways, unethical ways, and perhaps even illegal ways. One of the problems with the disqualification of him that came very late at night, like almost at midnight, was that the party didn't particularize the accusations against him. So they disqualified him, saying financial irregularities, but they didn't say what they were. Patrick Brown said, we didn't get the details, it was just gossip. Now, I don't know who is fibbing or not, but we do not know the actual reason why Patrick Brown was disqualified. And in that sense, maybe Marie Henein, the criminal lawyer retained by Patrick Brown, maybe she has something to say. And maybe she could say to a judge, there were the rules of the game. We spent $300,000 to pay the party to contest in that rules of the game. That was a contract, and the contract was broken. Maybe a court would say, yeah, you need fairer due process because you had a sort of contract. Or maybe the courts will defer and say, look, we're not going to micromanage every election in this country. We have to let the local decision makers have the benefit of the doubt. Even if Patrick Brown were to be successful legally, I think his brand is so dented by this. There's, the saying where there's smoke, there's fire. I think a lot of people would say, well, I don't know exactly what's going on, but if this is a premonition of how Patrick Brown would be as prime minister, that's not a good thing. Stephen Harper was so squeaky clean that a scandal in his tenure was a $16 orange juice. How I wish that was the scandal of the day. We're more like a $16 billion orange juice every month from Trudeau. So to have an ethical, straight and narrow, no shenanigans leader of the party, I think that's in the Conservative bloodstream. For all its flaws, Andrew Scheer got in trouble because he was using party money to send his kids to school. And the reason that was a scandal is because the Conservatives said, whoa, you're being a bit like Trudeau. Aaron O'Toole, pretty straight and narrow, again, too liberal for me. But I think people would say he was pretty clean in how he operated. I think Conservatives believe that it's not just red team, blue team. They believe there's a moral difference to being a Conservative candidate. And that's why I think Patrick Brown's foibles, they don't like Patrick Brown because he's a fake Conservative who sells out true blue policy if it's to his temporary advantage. But they also don't like Patrick Brown because he's sneaky. Yeah. He's just sneaky. And thus our vanity website, sneakypatrick.com. David Menzies, you caught him twice, sneaking in to the hockey game when he shut it down for kids, and then sneaking out of his sneaky hidden campaign office. He's a bit of a sneak.
It sure is. But you know what, Ezra, I got to tell you, I mean, as you know, Patrick Brown's been doing the news cycle, going to any media, except us, of course, that will have him. And he's complained this is a Pierre Poilievre conspiracy without a scintilla of evidence to back up those claims. But what's making the news now is that it wasn't an outsider, but an insider.
Yeah, the phone call was coming from inside the house.
Yeah. Deborah Jodoin, I hope I'm pronouncing her surname correctly. She was a regional organizer in Eastern Ontario. And basically, she got nervous because Brown told her it was permissible for her to be employed by a company as a consultant, and then for that company to have her volunteer with the campaign. It was a bit of a shell game, but it seems that it was a company paying Deborah, not the Patrick Brown campaign, and that's offside.
And you know what? You're talking about a complex structuring, and the very fact that Patrick Brown was into that and say, well, just structure it this way, we'll have this, and we'll have a secret payment and a false front, and just that way of thinking, it's, whoa, you're a little too casual and cavalier with that kind of operating. You seem like you do this a lot, and oh my God, what you must be doing in the city of Brampton. Remember, there's 5 local councillors who want a forensic audit, as you know, David.
Yep.
So a guy who's so easily and casually, like normally shenanigans are done by the dirty trickster in the campaign. You know, Warren Kinsella in the States, Roger Stone. Every campaign has sort of the dirty trickster. I mean, Nixon had, his guys breaking into the Watergate. But it wasn't Nixon himself breaking into the Watergate. It was Nixon's guys.
Yes.
And the thing about Patrick Brown is that he's the sneaky one.
Yeah,
he's the one who's got, well, no, just do scheme number 42. I remember when we did this back then, and no, just set it up. Like, holy moly. Normally, you at least keep the figurehead above the fray and out of the mess and plausible deniability. But Patrick Brown runs things a little bit like Tony Soprano. And of course, he knows every dark secret. It's not shocking at all to hear what this whistleblower said. And I say again, however it happened, I think this extinguished any of Patrick Brown's chances to become prime minister. Imagine having a guy like this with his tentacles in all the procurement, all the grants, all the appointments. I mean, Canada dodged an ethical bullet. I mean, we're in an ethical mess with Justin Trudeau, I grant you, but holy cow, Patrick Brown was a devastating accident that I think we just avoided.
You know, you're 100% right, Ezra. And when you mention Watergate, I mean, as the old saying goes, often it's not the crime, but the cover-up. I don't entirely agree with that. Sometimes I think it's the cover-up and the crime. And the crime here, it's spectacular. Patrick Brown is not a newbie to politics. He knows the rules. And yet, for him to keep making these same mistakes, I don't know, out of ambition, pride, vanity, the insatiable quest for power. This is what makes me scratch my head, because you almost think Patrick Brown might have had a shot at this if he just played it fair and square. Yeah.
Well, we're in interesting times. I'll say this. The energy level, the interest, and the hopes surrounding this leadership race in 2022 are much higher than they were when Andrew Scheer or Aaron O'Toole won. Those felt like also-rans, B-list or C-list. There was no energy. I don't think anyone truly believed we're going to win. I don't know if Pierre Poilievre will be the successful candidate. I think he will be. I don't know if he'll beat Trudeau. I think he will be, in part because we're heading into a recession, I believe. But I think for the first time, Conservatives are allowing themselves to dare to hope that maybe they can win the next election, and not just win a Pyrrhic victory, which is what a red Tory would be, but rather win a genuine ideological victory with a true believer in some conservative ideas. There's a little whiff of hope out there.
Yeah, it feels like the excitement around the Canadian Alliance and the reform and sort of that rebranding and rebirth of the conservative movement. I know, Ezra, you probably have to get going into the event. I think it's getting ready to start right away. Is Derek Fildebrandt the moderator tonight? Is he going to be asking these people what their favorite Stampede food is
I said a quick hello to Derek, and I congratulated him on convening the event, and I apologized that I'm neither dressed in business attire nor cowboy attire, and he forgave me. But like I said, I've been here for a little while, so I don't know what's going on the inside. I think Derek is a fairly substantive guy, so I think he's going to have some good Western-themed questions. I mean, that is the name of Western Standards, so I look forward to that. And I just love the fact that I'm here with a team of Rebel News journalists who I really only see by Zoom most of the time, so it's nice to be out here. But once again, David and Sheila, I really appreciate you guys holding the fort on the live stream, which is normally something I like to do. But I have to say it's exciting to be here on the ground again.
Well, Ezra, it was a pleasure as always. And hey, listen, it is Stampede weekend, so enjoy yourself. That's a big deal out in Calgary, isn't it?
I got 3 words for you: those little donuts.
You look like one after you've gotten through the Stampede. You end up looking like those little donuts.
Oh, they're too good. They're too good. It's the Alberta version of beaver tails. All right, you guys, thanks for your help. We'll see you later.
Thank you so much, Ezra. And that, folks, was our boss, Ezra Levant, coming to us either from the Calgary Petroleum Club or stately Wayne Manor. I'm not sure, but it looks
fancy.
like
it feels like old Calgary, fancy 70s Calgary when it was, the Houston of the North. That's what the Petroleum Club is like. It's so nice to see. It's very nostalgic.
Have you been to that club, Sheila?
Yes, I have.
Oh, nice. Yeah. No, I love it, and I'm sure Ezra's going to have a good time. But imagine that. I don't want to go off on a tangerine again, but 11 hours to Toronto to Calgary. Like, in theory, Ezra should be landing in Hong Kong with that much, airtime. That's a disgrace. And what's even more disgraceful, Sheila, I just heard an airline consultant being interviewed yesterday on radio. Can't remember the fellow's name, but he said, don't expect the situation to change until at least October. So in other words, the entire summer getaway season for those who can or want to fly, it's misery. And a lot of people were saying it'll be over by Labor Day. Add another month at least to that. That is despicable. It's egregious. And you can't tell me, Sheila, that this is not a fixable problem by the Justin Trudeau Liberals. It's just that there's no will to fix it, or it's Band-Aid solutions such as, well, we got huge lineups at the passport office. What shall we do? Well, let's put out a procurement for chairs. The problem with them sleeping on the street is that they don't have chairs to sleep in. Can't you see? Yeah.
I mean, the thing is about Liberal-created problems is that they are often made worse when Liberals try to fix them.
Yeah.
And so that's my worry here. If I recall correctly, I think it's above 50% of the Service Canada workforce is still working from home.
Correct.
Get those people back in the friggin' passport office. How are you processing passports from home? Get them back in the office and alleviate those lineups.
And there's this helplessness. I think it was at the Montreal passport office. It might have been the one that our beloved colleague Alexa Lavoie visited, Sheila, where what compounded the lineup problem is that they have 2 printers and one broke. And it was like, oh, what are we going to do? One of our printers is broken. I think there are staples in Montreal, right? Go get a printer, right? I mean, think outside the box. Put it on your own credit card.
These are government workers.
I know.
Government workers. They don't do that. But we do have our friend and colleague Adam Sos on the line from the event. I guess the event was pushed back 15 to 20 minutes. So we could have kept Ezra on, but I'd love to hear from Adam before he heads into the debate. Adam, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, gosh, you look so Westerny and great.
I know, right? Thanks. I don't know about great, but Western as can be.
Adam, where's the 10-gallon hat?
Oh, it's over there somewhere. I
It would
left
be
it
out
at
of the
home.
frame.
I haven't quite roped a steer, so once I do that, I can earn the hat.
Got to earn it, yeah.
Wow. Well, so Adam, to ask a question Sheila asked of Ezra, how is the building filling up? What is the vibe or the mood in the air? What can you tell us on ground level?
Well, it's very intimate. I actually just did an interview with Derek Fildebrandt about the evening. They've changed the structure a little bit, obviously, as we've seen a couple candidates sort of dropping out as they did. So they're going to be doing actually a more sort of intimate personal conversation, fireside chat style, which is good. It's a stark contrast to what we saw at the last conservative leadership debate in Edmonton, where the questions were very short and sort of
stupid. Stupid.
Yeah. What's your favorite Netflix series?
Questions.
Basically along the lines of what kind of shampoo do you use? So it's going to be a little more intimate. Slowly filling in here. Downtown was like kind of closed because of the Stampede Parade. So even around 1, there was a ton of traffic trying to get downtown, so that could be delaying things. People are coming in, but it is pretty great. Roman Baber, Scott Aitchison, Jean Charest just kind of standing around, had an opportunity to chat with them briefly. They didn't want to go on camera right before the debate, but it's very intimate, very close quarters, so we had a chance to talk with those folks.
And by the way, who is the moderator for this debate, Adam?
Derek Fildebrandt himself.
Oh, it is Derek Fildebrandt. Okay, not Tom Clark?
No, not Tom Clark, unfortunately. He was, I don't know, what's the most boring thing you could possibly do? He was doing whatever that is.
I'll never forget that debate. No applause. Yeah. We're going to subtract time from the candidate. It was like a substitute teacher in a kindergarten class admonishing the people. I think people should just yelled their heads off for the whole debate in spite of them. Yeah. But so that's good. So we're looking forward to a better debate that way. Adam, the bombshell news, of course, of this week, but then again, is it really a bombshell? It's really deja vu all over again. Of course, a scandal and Patrick Brown, 2 words that go together like peanut butter and jelly. And here's the question, with Brown out of it and assuming he's not going to get back in, and I don't think he will, who do you think of the remaining field of candidates benefits the most by that?
That's a very good question. I mean, I think the Patrick Brown people were not necessarily an extremely passionate group ideologically. We've seen time and time again people saying, my mosque told me to come. I don't really support this guy. We've seen a lot of that type of conduct. It could be something of an even proliferation, or even people who are kind of told who to vote for, going out and voting for whoever they might vote for. It's interesting, though, because some of these communities that were sort of, my church or my mosque or whatever told me to be here, they are in sort of practice and conviction rather conservative, in fact. So now that they haven't been told to vote for this liberal in conservatives' clothing, it may actually end up benefiting some of the conservative candidates. No doubt, though, everyone's going to be trying to clutch at some of that. Jean Charest may gain and benefit. But I don't know if there's necessarily like a key demographic that will shift from, this guy espouses the same values as Patrick Brown, because I don't think many people know if Patrick Brown espouses values at all.
I don't know, except he doesn't like other conservatives. That's what I know about Patrick Brown. But you are right when you point out that a lot of these communities in which he was campaigning, they are social conservative by nature. Mm-hmm. I think because they might be unchained from the Patrick Brown cart, they might actually go to Leslyn Lewis, when you would think, Red Tory, they'll just flow to Jean Charest. I don't know about that, but you are right to point out that we did see a lot of people saying, I support the PPC, but my mosque told me to be here to support Patrick Brown. So I am. Go ahead, David.
And Sheila and Adam, I think it's worse than how you're selling it, actually. I've spoken to some of my sources in the Brampton area, and they've told me that some of the people that, bought memberships in terms of the Patrick Brown campaign are new arrivals to Canada. They don't even speak English. They don't even know what they've signed up for. Sure. And, this is de rigueur Patrick Brown way of selling memberships. I'm sorry.
Patrick wouldn't do that.
It feels like exploitation a little bit that he's doing that. Now, Adam, I know that the team has been workshopping questions all day, and I'm very excited to see you guys in the scrums afterwards ask. have you been talking to some of the people who are in attendance? What's on the top of their mind for them, if you have?
Yeah, so we've got a whole team here, as I think Ezra already mentioned. So we've kind of divided things up. Ezra's doing his best to talk to some of the politicians. Angelica is talking, one of our new reporters. She's been doing social media, but she's taking a stab at it. She's going to be talking to people and garnering their opinions. We've just kind of been setting up here. I did do a bit of a lengthier interview with Derek Fildebrandt, and then I'm going to go around and ask these folks afterwards kind of what their opinion is on the provincial leadership race that we have here in the province and this sort of intersection in there. So we do certainly plan on getting to that. This event goes right until about 7:30, but the debate's actually going to end at 4:50. So there should be lots of opportunities to garner some people's perspectives and see if there's sort of people who are on Team Lewis are looking at this candidate provincially, if there's any sort of overlap there. So it'll be interesting, certainly. But again, just setting up. People are just really starting to pour in now. So I haven't had a ton of those conversations yet.
David?
Oh, sorry, Sheila. I thought you had another
Did you
question.
zone out? Are you having a stroke?
No, not at all. Adam, what is your assessment as to why Pierre Poilievre, clearly the front runner, is not attending? Officially, his excuse is he is going to be at a nearby party with entrepreneur Brett Wilson. I'm not sure I buy that. I think maybe he could have done both, or he could have, come later to that party. But do you think, my friend, it's all about, since he is the front runner, kind of like what we saw with Doug Ford in the provincial debates, he never hung around for the scrums with journalists, because if the polls indicate you're the clear leader, why get entrapped by maybe a gotcha question that might harm you? Is that the situation? And how do you feel about that? Because maybe it's a prudent political strategy, but in terms of leadership, I'm a little queasy about avoiding debates and questions.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's sad because 100%, I completely understand why his campaign team would say, listen, we're winning, don't botch us. Particularly at a small event like this, you're exposed, unlike the mainstream media who ask the 6 Trudeau-approved questions. We might actually ask a question that people are interested in an answer to. We might actually ask a question that gets headlines when they respond, and maybe not the type of headlines they want. So I completely understand on a strategic level why they're doing that. My concern is we're just getting past the era of Andrew Scheer's and Aaron O'Toole's, even the Redford era of maybe not even necessarily espousing or being passionate about conservative values, not believing you have the best ideas. It was kind of this lukewarm milquetoast conservatism. Now, I don't think Pierre Poilievre is that, but the fact that he's a little uneasy and doesn't want to risk losing his lead, he's going to have to maintain that lead and stand in that lead if he's the leader of this country. And he's going to face, no doubt, with this heavily bought and paid for media, extensive scrutiny as the leader of this country. My question is, if he can't make it through a leadership campaign without losing people's support, how is he going to run a country for 4, 8, whatever it may be, years moving forward?
Yeah.
Well,
sorry
to interrupt, but I've never seen Pierre Poilievre flub a question ever. When people ask him tough questions, that's when he's the best. So I get the strategy, but also give the people what they need. It's like going to watch wrestling. You know that he is going to come out there as the champ and absolutely axe murder Jean Charest on the stage. And people want to see that. That's why people initially said, we want the Western Standard debate to go forward because we want to see Pierre Poilievre just hatchet job Jean Charest on the stage. That's what the people wanted. Give the people what they need. They can't fly. The airports are a mess. Let them have some of that entertainment at home.
And you want to be the people's champ. You have to be with the people. Maybe he's off in Hollywood doing a series of action films presently, but eventually he does have to come back. Finally home to the people. And this is the ring. Like, Pierre Poilievre is probably one of the best debaters out there. There are some people who are sort of very strong. I'd suggest like Roman Baber, Dr. Leslie Lewis, a very intelligent people, obviously, but they don't have that like social media viralness to them.
And the charisma and confidence. He's got charisma and confidence. People wanted to see that tonight, even though it wouldn't necessarily move the needle in his direction. If you are in the Poilievre camp, you're not going to, whatever happens tonight is not going to make or break you, but you wanted to see your guy win in the ring.
Well, and you're likely to get some different questions at an event like this that maybe
Right.
you haven't addressed before. And if you don't get a perfect answer, no one's going to run that clip, no one's going to watch it, no one's going to care. But if someone asks you a question and you nail one out of the park again on an issue, that might bring another 5% of people over. They might say, hey, I like that answer on that issue. So there's an opportunity to win even more people over. And I think furthermore, another important consideration here is the fact that he's mentioned repeatedly, unlike the other candidates, that he's running for prime minister of the country. He's not just running for leadership here. This should be an opportunity. If he's so confident, he should be using this opportunity to not try and only win the leadership of this party, but to take every platform that he can so that other people are like, I'm going to vote for Pierre Poilievre over the Liberals, over the NDP. This is an opportunity.
You know, but Adam, here's the thing. I mean, I've covered a couple of Pierre Poilievre rallies in the GTA. I can tell you he says all the right things, and the proof in the pudding on that is the number of standing ovations he gets when he gives a speech, the longest and loudest standing ovation every single time being his pledge to defund the CBC, by the way. So that speaks volumes, I think. But I think back, you know, I look at the interview he had with Jordan Peterson, and he said words to the effect of he has a tremendous amount of respect for the independent press. And yet here you have him dodging certain debates. He won't have a sit-down interview with us. I mean, if we bump into him, he'll talk to us. He won't run away. But, you know, if he says he has a lot of respect for the independent press, which is us, of course, then come on. You're talking the talk, but, you know, walk the walk as well. Is that a fair criticism to make?
Yeah, 100%. And it goes to those allegations. One, the absurd allegations from Patrick Brown that we're somehow working for Pierre Poilievre. Well, I assure you, if that was the case, we would have negotiated some more interviews. But yeah, 100%. I know his team last time in Calgary, they'd reached out and we talked about potentially setting something up. That's when there was like the 12-hour line that people were there all night. So he said next time. I haven't heard back since. But yeah, he's heralding this very popular sentiment that independent media is critical. He said that repeatedly. He's on that bandwagon because, as you can see, Western Standard, Rebel News, True North, Post Millennial, all these organizations are growing very rapidly, and they're popular. So he's saying, yes, of course, I like them because that's a popular sentiment right now. But you have to walk the walk and not just talk the talk. And one of the ways to do that is to have those conversations. We've seen candidates that not all that long ago, Danielle Smith, provincially speaking, most people were like, I don't know, man. She has been readily available. She did like a half-hour plus interview that Mocha filmed. We've shown up at other events. She's willing to speak, address people directly, and she's skyrocketing. Some people are considering her, alongside Brian Jean, very much a front runner because she's readily available and she doesn't shy away from issues. She talks about her past scandals directly and unabashedly. She owns it. And I think people want that type of honesty. That's the type of politician that they want. I think they thought that's what Pierre Poilievre is, and maybe he is. But some of this activity dipping out for scrums is not indicative of that.
And that's the thing, Adam. Hopefully he does come as advertised. I mean, if we had a crystal ball that we could collectively look into and say we go to 2025, he is the leader, he goes to an election, he becomes the prime minister. Do you think that one of the first order of business that he would do, because as I said, the longest and loudest standing ovation he gets is defunding the CBC. Is he going to do that? Or is there going to be some kind of read the fine print? Well, when I said defund, I didn't exactly mean 100% defund. That's what, you know, makes me nervous. And believe me, I'm a Pierre Poilievre fan. I love what he's saying. I'm just praying that unlike, you know, Aaron O'Toole and Andrew Scheer, that he does indeed come as advertised.
And that's a matter of how much he's willing to stand up to the party and be Pierre Poilievre instead of being just the next leader of the conservative institution as it presently exists. That will be the critical sort of threshold. Now, in politics, sometimes there is compromise, and people have to understand that you're not necessarily always going to get what you want. So on the specific question of the CBC, I don't doubt that he would take significant action very early on. But I mean, record this because it probably will be a crystal ball. What is likely going to happen is we're going to see Radio Canada, some of the remote networks, radio, some exclusive shows, French culture shows, some of the sort of stuff on the periphery in quote unquote underrepresented or low access communities. I have a feeling some of that stuff will continue, but I have a feeling that there probably rather quickly will be a concerted effort to get out of the $1 billion for junk nobody's watching market. So I think and I hope if Pierre Poilievre is the man he presents himself to be, that will happen. But I just have a feeling that there might be a backlash on those other fronts, which I can understand to an extent. I'm not in favor of any sort of subsidies for media, but I do know a number of conservative, rather principled people who are strong on issues. That sort of model of preserving some but not all was what was proposed by Aaron O'Toole, in fact, and a number of MPs are still on board with that plan. So massive funding reduction, but not necessarily axing the sort of cultural tapestry of the CBC for those communities.
I just think they could go directly to YouTube. Like, I don't know why I have to be involved in any of that. There's so much easier to just
and by the way,
don't
think I'm heartless. I'm not saying cancel the CBC. I'm saying
I
cancel its funding. It's taxpayer dollars, which is to say that the CBC, like every other network out there, you sell advertising. You sell subscriptions, you crowdfund like we do. Oh my goodness, could you imagine Rosemary Barton getting on the mic and asking for money? I know that would be terribly beneath her, but that is the most honest way of fundraising. Yeah. So I'm just saying, here you go. You've got all the equipment. You've got your broadcast license, your CRTC approval. Now earn your keep and get off the bloody taxpayer teat once and for all. That's all.
Yeah. Oh, and I'd be inclined. I think I'm more along the lines of Sheila. If you can't survive, clearly there's not a demand for you. So why are we spending? And this isn't like, a $10,000 grant for community radio. This is like, 6 people listen to you. Here's $1 million. It's just it's completely disjointed from reality. And I think the problem with conservatives is there's all these liberal institutions, all the staff working there is liberal. The whole thing is innately liberal. And then the conservatives come in and they try to we can reduce a little bit here and reduce a little bit there. They're not gutting that institutional illness that's in the CBC, that's in Indian Affairs, that's in all these other sort of industries that just prop themselves up. They have no motivation or inspiration or reason to ameliorate things because they'd be undermining their own jobs. They live in perpetuity to just keep these things going, so they're never going to make it more efficient or more cost effective. It's like the end of we have to spend the money or else they're going to take part of our budget away, like an episode of The Office or whatever. Yeah. That's how they operate, and I think Sheila would agree, it kind of has to be axed and started afresh.
Yep. Now, Adam, I wanted to ask you, I guess I'll just ask you your opinion, because this is something that you focused on here at Rebel News. But I also think there's a huge opportunity being missed by Pierre Poilievre by not being at this to advance things that he likes to talk about. And he's really the only person talking about it with regard to Indigenous issues and unlocking Indigenous prosperity. I know that Chief Billy Morin in Edmonton, outside of Edmonton, at Enoch, a very young, ambitious, business-forward Indigenous chief there, he endorsed Pierre Poilievre. And I know that some of those same things are happening in Calgary at Tutsina, Stoney Nakoda, and Siksika. I think he's missing a real opportunity to speak to those people about his ideas for addressing generational poverty and business partnerships between Indigenous bands and oil and gas, like what we see in Fort McMurray. I just feel like he's missing a huge opportunity by not being here, just at least to show how much he's different than there's Chief Billy, just to show how much Pierre Poilievre is different from the other candidates on this one issue.
Yeah, well, and I think that is, like I talked about earlier, the opportunity to win new people over. Justin Trudeau has done nothing and given no concrete deadlines, not taken action. If Pierre Poilievre came here and spent almost a whole debate talking about Alberta issues, including Indigenous issues, and really drove that point home, people out there who are passionate about Indigenous issues and are starting to say, Justin Trudeau doesn't care about these people.
Yeah.
You know who
and
does,
they'll
though?
also say he's the only person talking about it.
Yeah.
Exactly. And if he was like, concrete plan, here's the issues, if he talked to not necessarily the liberal appointed Indigenous voices who come out and echo their sentiments, but those who are critical of the government, like Jocelyn Bergewick, Melissa Mbarki, some of these people, and said, okay, what do we do to ameliorate the situation for Indigenous communities in Canada? And at the very least, as they are Canadian citizens, bring them up to the standard of life that you and I expect as a minimum for anyone in Canada. True. If Poilievre, it's going to be an issue during the race for the prime ministership of this country. If Pierre Poilievre starts that narrative now and says, I'm the one who cares about Indigenous issues, you and I, conservative folks, we're 100% on board with getting that situation fixed. Unleashing the capacity of the communities, the Indigenous communities that take on a growth and business and prosperity sort of approach to life, do so much better. There's less poverty. There's a better quality of life. If Pierre Poilievre became an advocate for, one, a practical solution for clean water, but two, unlocking the business potential and actually indicating not that these people need a handout, but they can contribute in unbelievable ways to the growth of this country moving forward, I think he would win a lot of people over, both from the NDP as well as from the Liberals.
And, Adam, I echo Sheila's opinion about this being a missed opportunity. And for another angle, you are coming to us from the Calgary Petroleum Club, and Pierre Poilievre is unashamedly pro-fossil fuels, pro-pipelines, pro-drilling. This is the key to getting our economy back on the rails, getting our what the consumer pays at the pump for gasoline, getting that down again. And he's in a city and a province where this is like gospel to them. I mean, what do you have to lose going out on a limb on that?
Well, and this is the issue. So I believe Dr. Leslyn Lewis is in like Iqaluit or something tonight. There's an event at the Petroleum Club in Calgary on the first day of Stampede, not long after the Stampede Parade. If you want to make clear to Calgarians that Calgary is not going to be forgotten, that the West is going to get a fair deal, that the West is an important part of Canada, you don't skip out on a leadership debate at the Petroleum Club with independent media on the first day of Stampede. This is one of those ones you have to be at if you want to indicate that you care about the West.
That's an excellent point. And I think it is a miscalculation. I don't know. And Sheila, do you buy the excuse that it was a scheduling conflict with having a party with Brett Wilson? Are you?
What kind of party starts at 4:30?
Usually they end at 4:30 in the morning.
It's it's Stampede. There is no start party, no end date for your party, because even after Stampede's over, then your hangover begins. I don't know. I 50% of me buys it, but 50% of me is a skeptic, because the Western Standard, they initially said they weren't going to go ahead with their debate, so they canceled it, and then they re-upped their debate. And so I can see how there might be scheduling conflicts, and also, it gives Poilievre the opportunity to work some donors at the Wilson event. But I don't know. If you're the guy that people
why is he leaving the scrums?
Yeah.
Why is he leaving every? Exactly. If it was this as a standalone, sure. It's the fact that this is now becoming a pattern that I agree with you on this one. But when it's every time, there's a plausible but maybe not quite viable excuse.
Yeah. And also, I was discussing earlier with Sheila and Ezra, Adam, I mean, this debate, it's reduced to 4 candidates, and I'm very skeptical any of them have a legitimate chance of winning the leadership race and becoming prime minister. But I don't know, it's kind of like tuning into Looney Tunes without Coyote and Roadrunner, and that would be Poilievre and Brown. And Brown has no choice in the matter, of course. He was disqualified. But do you think this debate might just be reduced to going through the motions, that what we see now with the disqualification of Brown is a coronation of Pierre Poilievre in the months ahead?
Well, I think that for some of the candidates out there who don't really have like an angle and haven't really Dr. Leslyn Lewis, more of a social conservative. Pierre Poilievre, obviously the front runner. Roman Baber, who was something of not a major name. He's come out pretty strongly in some of these mandates and become sort of one of those people that freedom-oriented people are standing for. So I think For those people who maybe don't have an identity and are for sound fiscal policy, I think they're just kind of there being on stage. I honestly don't know how much their presence matters. But for the candidates who have sort of strong standing principles, like Roman Baber, he may set the tone for conversations in debates leading forward, and he may all the campaign teams are going to be watching this, and they may be like, oh, we need to respond to this issue or draw something on this. Particularly, there was an accord for the West or whatever it was Jean Charest announced very recently, talking about sort of a fair deal for this. That, ironically, probably most people out West are not massive Jean Charest supporters, but that may prompt other candidates to come forward, and I'm sure he's going to speak about that tonight and say, oh yeah, you've got a plan to ensure Alberta's included, here's our concrete plan to ensure Alberta's included. So background characters can formulate part of the story, so I'm hoping that at least they'll be able to act as voices in the conversation, even though many of them not likely to enter the leadership.
But by the same token though, Adam, when you look at Jean Charest, I would imagine he has a tough sell out in Western Canada, simply because for 8 years on his resume, he was the Liberal Premier of Quebec. I mean, how do you gloss that one over?
You know, Albertans are good, down-to-earth, honest, forgiving people.
It's true.
If you talk to people a couple of years ago about Danielle Smith, even recently, until she started to become a good advocate on these issues, people really disliked her. Yeah. She comes out, and she leaves chorus. She leaves in order on principle because she's not willing to endorse. She wanted to talk about vaccine issues. They wouldn't let her. She left on principle. She apologized and said she made a mistake, and she came clean. And now she's advocating for values. And Albertans who maybe 6 months ago were like, I'm not interested in Danielle Smith at all, they're saying maybe Danielle Smith. If Jean Charest gets up there and says, Quebec got a heck of a lot done by demanding it, and I think Alberta needs to do that too. And here's what we're going to do to ensure that you get a fair deal at the table. I'm the one who's going to get pipeline built. I'm the one who's going to do this, that, the other thing. I think people are very open. It's not so much Trudeau's my guy, so I'm voting for him. Poilievre, I think, is in the lead because he has the best ideas people resonate with. I think people can enter that conversation if they bring those ideas forward. So I think Jean Charest, maybe not as much of an outlier as you might think in Alberta, because Albertans generally pretty polite and open people.
No, you know, and I think that extends beyond Alberta, as a matter of fact, Adam. I think a lot of people, whether it's in politics, whether it's in business, don't understand how forgiving the public can be if they're given an honest, sincere explanation and or apology. As we were saying earlier, the worst thing you can do is cover it up, because as the saying goes, sometimes it's the cover up is worse than the crime. So I'll give you that point, and we'll see what he says to a Calgary audience in the debate that's forthcoming.
Yeah, we're looking forward to it. Hopefully Ezra will have a chance to have a conversation with him after that. Would be a great interaction. I'm looking forward to seeing.
Fantastic. And Sheila, do you have any parting queries for our friend before we get to the debate?
Sorry, I was just sending a message to the Calgary team as I was talking.
Oh, you multitasker.
I am.
Hold on, I'm
I
getting
just
a message
wanted to
from
ask
Sheila.
you know, it's true. Saying, don't ask that question. They've already answered it. Today, a court in Ottawa said that they were going to keep Tamara Lich at least until next Thursday, where they will hear her arguments from her lawyers again. I just want to know if you have a sense that might be a question in the debate today. I think it goes to the crux of civil liberties in this country.
Well, I can assure you it will be a question, probably our first question in the scrum as we get up there. And like I said, our whole team is here, so we're surely going to ask that. I hope it comes up in the conversation, certainly, because I think it is such a critical issue. Just at face value, when we're talking about the ongoing prosecution that is extended from these absurd mandates, listen, on this front, what happened was Tamara Lich was attending an event that her lawyers, her law firm, the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, was putting on. All of her legal counsel was effectively present, and she took a photo with an individual she wasn't supposed to have communications with if counsel wasn't present. This is just such an open and shut perversion of justice. And at face value, I understand, this is the guy she's not supposed to, I mean, I don't agree with it, but I understand. This is the guy she's not supposed to be with. There's a picture of them together. lock her up. I don't agree with it, but I understand on their sick, perverted lockdown mentality how they got there. As soon as they were like, oh, this event was being run by her legal counsel, they're present. At face value, prima facie, it's over. She needed to be escorted back home with an apology right away. That didn't happen. This is just an absolute perversion of justice. And for people out there who don't think this is a principal issue, you can ask Jason Kenney about that, because most people were pretty happy with Jason Kenney's performance on almost every front, except for, maybe not in action, but in principle anyways, except for his action on freedom. The fact he locked people down and violated fundamental and constitutional freedoms, closed down churches, oversaw the fining of churches, despite the fact he's like, oh, it's the legal system. Nonsense. It is the reason he's not the leader of the UCP anymore, and why we're having this debate. And the future federal leadership of the Conservative Party of Canada, that is an issue they're going to have to address. The people who are coming forward and exclusively talking about fiscal issues have no chance at winning, period, because the massive wound in this country that Justin Trudeau and Jason Kenney and basically every politician across this country has inflicted will require years to remedy. And a politician who hopes to lead the country who isn't willing to talk about that and is just committing to getting pipelines built, they're not the person to lead this country moving forward. There's serious wounds that need to be healed. I hear clapping, so I don't know if you guys have to run.
No, I don't have to run, but maybe you have to run.
Yeah. No, I mean, if you're hopping over, so, yeah.
Yeah. Do we have to go, Olivia? Do you know? They're not streaming yet? Okay. Although you might have to run in there. You might have to run in there to go see. But I just wanted to ask you another question, or I don't know, make another point, start another soliloquy. I think it speaks to also a broader issue, not just about civil liberties and how civil liberties have sort of, they come and go based on your politics at this point, but also the politicization and the contamination of aspects of the legal system by the Trudeau Liberals. We are seeing this come straight out of the mass casualty inquiry in Nova Scotia, where we saw the commissioner of the RCMP stand on some dead bodies to push a liberal gun control agenda and leak information or offer information that could jeopardize that case, just as long as it got Justin Trudeau's gun control efforts pushed forward. And we have this liberal donating, I say liberal linked, but it's much worse than that, liberal donor to the tune of $17,000. That's the crown on the Tamara Lich trial. So I think hopefully one of the questions can be, or one of the topics is, how do we stop the politicization of what is supposed to be a completely nonpartisan justice system? Because under the Liberals, it has gone rapidly in one direction.
Well, and this goes back to what I talked about earlier with the CBC being institutionally corrupt. What you see, whether it be provincially, federally, is the expansion of government bodies, the expansion of government organizations under high-spending, often progressive Liberals, and they put all their friends in. They put their activist friends in those circles. Then the Conservatives come in and maybe cut funding a bit, but those people are often left in those exact same positions, and that has affected the legal system. It's affected media in this country. It's affected every possible aspect of life that the government can touch. They just on a fundamental level have infiltrated. And so the leadership moving forward right across the board, they need to commit. And this is one of the questions that I hope to ask, if given one or two questions after we ask that Tamara Lich question, is even if you look at the influence of World Economic Forum, the United Nations, progressive lobby groups, and political corruption and judicial corruption. But what do these people plan to do to remedy those sort of institutional wrongs, those institutional ailments that cutting a little bit and having a good fiscal policy are not going to remedy? Because those are the critical issues. And mark my words on this, if those institutions aren't repaired, you can very quickly see a country go from Canada to Venezuela under very bad leadership, despite having all the resources you can imagine. That can happen if the institutions crumble, particularly one of the sort of stalwart cornerstones of society, the judicial system.
Well, and I think, too, this is fueling this Western separation sentiment, where I've seen polling data out, I think it was late last week, where more Canadians or more Albertans are expressing separatist sentiment than Quebecers. And I think this has a lot to do with the fact that Albertans who I think we're more freedom oriented, I think, than the rest of the country. It's just part of our culture. But when we look and say, no, these Laurentian institutions do not defend us, we should go and sort of build our own way from the ground up. I think it has a lot to do with that.
Well, and your perfect example of that is Justice Adam Germain, who against Pastor Artur Pawlowski brought forward this insane Soviet-style compelled speech mandate and travel ban that has been stayed. And in the appeal, Alberta Health Service lawyers, I think somewhat unintentionally, conceded that it was unconstitutional. So that will be thrown away. That judge was a failed Liberal politician who was effectively appointed by the Liberals. That's how he got his job. It's extremely troubling, and that's one example, but it's rampant right across the country.
You know, Adam, I like that term you used earlier, perversion of justice. And I can tell you, because Ezra's in Calgary, I'll be guest hosting the Ezra Levant show this evening. And my monologue is about what we experienced on Dominion Day weekend in Ottawa. We had a whole team of rebels down for that. And the no fun police were out in full force. You couldn't bring onto Parliament Hill, for example, We the Fringe or F Trudeau flags. You couldn't be a street preacher preaching the gospel. One gentleman wrote in chalk, free Tamara Lich. He received a fine in excess of $1,000. And on that same Dominion Day weekend, just down the 401 in Toronto, the Muslim Association of Canada was having a 3-day conference, and you had participants, speakers at that conference, and they were saying things like advocating the death penalty for homosexuals, that it is perfectly acceptable to beat your wife, that suicide bombers are actually heroes. All of that, and by the way, on the screen we have Terry Glavin's column. If this is coming as news to anyone, you are forgiven, because the mainstream media avoided this conference like the plague, except for Terry Glavin of the National Post. And I think there was an article in the Jerusalem Post, for that matter, as well. What I'm saying is, you had people peaceful protesters in Ottawa being handcuffed, being given tickets, being tackled for supposed hate because a flag was maybe offensive. Whereas in Toronto, you had people preaching harm and death to identifiable groups, and law enforcement and bylaw and politicians, nothing to see here, folks. I think that's an absolute disgrace. And by the way, one of the biggest backers of the Muslim Association of Canada is Justin Trudeau, because in the last few years, $3 million of your tax money has gone to propping up this organization that is rife with hatred. The proof is in the pudding from that conference they staged last weekend. What's your take, Adam, on this horrible hypocrisy, this despicable double standard that we see in this country now?
Well, it's glaring, and there's sort of ideological groups, and that nominally the ones that stick out the most, and it's certainly not representative. I think, as I just did an interview with Gays Against Groomers, Jamie Michelle, which is I think out right now. Whenever we talk about these groups, probably the vast majority of people, whether they be gay, whether they be Muslim, don't agree with those extremist positions. But the fact remains, you see people exposing themselves naked on public streets during Pride, twerking in front of children. If anyone did that in any other context, they would be arrested. At these types of events, you see active calls for hate and violence against those same communities that in any other circumstance other than a Muslim event, categorically, there would just be an investigation and charges pressed. For some reason, there's certain groups in society under Justin Trudeau, and this really wasn't a thing. There were sort of the groups you can and can't talk about, but there wasn't such an essential judicial and wide-sweeping immunity for these groups. And in my conversation with Jamie Michelle from Gays Against Groomers, we were talking about very often these people, whether they were new arriving immigrants who had the Muslim faith or members of the gay community, the early origins of those movements were, we just want equal treatment. What they're pushing for now is exemption exception from the law that applies to the rest of us. And society cannot function like that. It doesn't matter if you're Indigenous, a new immigrant, extremely wealthy. But I mean, look at what we're seeing. Justin Trudeau has countless ethics violations. Any other person would be in serious legal trouble and certainly would have been asked by a real party to step down as leader at the very least. But when the leader himself, the person who is supposed to be held to the highest standard and serve as a model for the rest of us, is completely corrupt, and there are no consequences for him or the people who fall under his umbrella, this is what you see in society.
No, well said, Adam. And I mean, I'm pretty much, and I'm sure everyone on Rebel is pretty much the same, that we're free speech absolutists. But my line in the sand is when you advocate harm or death to an individual or to an identifiable group. And that's what we saw happening at this convention in Toronto, staged by the Muslim Association of Canada. And I got to ask you, I mean, like, you know...
No, you don't have to ask him. Sorry, I don't want to cut you off, but I think the event is starting. Olivia whispers in my ear that Adam should run into the event now.
Okay, then. To be continued, Adam Seuss.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.
Area would be trade, non-trade. So that would be the beginning of the Alberta Accord, a fresh start for Canada in regards to how we deal with Alberta and we deal with all of the country.
So anyone who watches The Pipeline will know I get very impressed with my ability to segue, and I'm equally impressed with myself right now. Alberta's going through a not so quiet revolution right now. In the 1960s and early 70s, Quebec started to assert itself as, Quebec Nation, what have you, and to take back control. See this great segue? We had the Firewall Letter of 2001 signed by Stephen Harper and other largely academics and some other people in the business community in Calgary. We had the Fair Deal Panel in 2020. And I think, so the direction continues to get more aggressive in terms of what at least a large segment of Alberta is demanding. And Saskatchewan is, I think, coming along on some of these things. One of the major candidates for the leadership of the United Conservative Party of Alberta, Danielle Smith, has proposed something she calls the Alberta Sovereignty Act. I'm not sure how much you know about it, but this would more or less be an act that allows the legislature to declare certain federal legislation will just not be enforced in Alberta. It'll be on the books, but just will not be enforced. Other provinces have experimented with things like this in the past, just not quite so brashly enshrined it in legislation, but there were things like that with drug policy in British Columbia over time, and Quebec has done it to one degree or another. If the Alberta Sovereignty Act passes and you were elected prime minister, how would you react to it?
Well, and what you're describing in your introduction, by the way, is, a move towards more autonomy of the provinces. There's nothing wrong with that, by the way, folks. I mean, again, Canada is one of the most decentralized federations in the world. The only other country that is more decentralized than Canada, and I hope there's no one from Belgium here, is Belgium, and no one understands how Belgium operates. And their best period is when they had no government for a year and a half. But Canada, and also one of the features of Canadian federalism, contrary to other federations, is that the provinces are responsible for natural resources. That's an exception, more than rule. And so there's nothing wrong, Derek, with provinces assuming more autonomy. And the idea is that the federal government's job is to coordinate this to make it work. The federal government will continue to have very real powers. One of them is called the federal spending power, which is extremely important and gives them the ability to do a whole number of things. But we are stronger when provinces are strong.
Okay, so I know you've spoken a lot about autonomy and provinces taking control over their areas and provincial jurisdiction, but I mean to press on this, this specifically, the idea of not enforcing certain federal legislation on the provincial level.
Well, it depends. Let's try to give it an example. Let's take the environment, for example. We could very well coordinate environmental processes so that whatever the provincial environmental process is, it is value for what the federal environment process is. You understand what? And I've seen that done before. You say, instead of doing 2 environmental processes, we're going to do 1. Or there will be the provincial environmental process that the federal government recognizes as being the equivalent of what the federal government would do. That is the kind of intelligent thing you do in a federation that works. I understand, by the way, very well what Danielle Smith is saying in regards to how we operate our federation. And that's why one of the reasons why I'm running, by the way, and why I think I would be for this job the right person, is that I actually think it'd be a breath of fresh air in Ottawa to have someone as Prime Minister who's been the Premier of a province and who actually understands how the country operates. And what I'm going to say may surprise a lot of people. I've been on both sides. But you know what? There's a lot of people in Ottawa who don't know how this country operates. They don't have a clue. And it's a bubble. And it is a bubble. I've experienced it. And I remember being Premier and saying to my colleagues, I only wish the feds would be as federalist as I was federalist. And I'll give you an example. Mr. Trudeau comes out of the campaign. He delivers a budget, does a deal with Mr. Singh. They're back on spending when actually we should be reining in spending. And then with Mr. Singh, he makes a deal where he says this. He says, we're going to try to do an agreement on pharmacare and dental care. Ladies and gentlemen, that is provincial jurisdiction, A. B, can I tell you something? When they come to the table, Derek, and say to the provinces, we want to do a deal on pharmacare and we'll co-fund it, I guarantee you the answer will be, we have seen this movie before. And as soon as there's a downturn in the economy, you guys are going to walk away from funding and we'll be left holding the program. It's not going to happen. And what does that say about that government? They don't get it. They don't understand how it works. Well, I think it'd be good to have a Prime Minister who does and who's been there.
Okay. Well, thank you.
By the way, I've never thought in my lifetime I'd have Jay Hill and his wife Leah applaud me so much. I may run you as a candidate in my campaign.
My reporters have just taken notes.
Oh, I'm sorry. Don't record that.
Since 2020, the federal government, the provinces have engaged in, we're switching gears a bit here. The federal government, the provinces have engaged in a very large suite of restrictions involving COVID. Lockdowns, mandatory masking, mandatory vaccines. This, in many respects, has created a breach. This has been particularly difficult for conservative leaders to handle. I think as the libertarian portion, for lack of a better term, within the Conservative coalition, I think has become probably a larger segment than it has been maybe in the past. And it's created a breach with those kinds of voters. It has arguably taken down the last Conservative leader, Erin O'Toole. It, I think, very arguably took down the Premier of Alberta. We're having two leadership races here. You've been critical of Mr. Poilievre and Mr. Baber's support of the Freedom Convoy. And I know that you've said you want to get rid of the remaining federal mandates. I think absolutely everybody does. But I want to know if you believe that at least the federal mandates, and I know the provincial ones are a whole other kettle of fish here, but the federal mandates, do you believe that they were ever justified at any point in the last 2.5 years?
You mentioned Roman, and I want to say something about Roman. And I didn't know him very well before this leadership race, but I know enough about Roman to say this. Roman stood on a question of principle and sacrificed a lot to stand on those principles. And I want to recognize that, because that is something that doesn't happen very often and is admirable and says something about character. And he wasn't the last one to arrive at this, by the way. He didn't follow the parade. He was ahead of it, and he paid a price for that. Now, on this issue, which is always a very difficult issue, I think the federal government, I can't follow what their positions are now. I think as we all started on this COVID episode, no one had a playbook on how you do it. And I think we all cut slack for everyone, including whether it's Kenny, Ford, whether it's Legault in Quebec, or everyone. We're trying to figure out what is this and how do we deal with it and how do we protect people? One thing stands out in my experience and the Canadian experience relative to the rest of the world. It's our inability to treat people in hospitals, what we call our capacity. And that's what the main difference was between Canada and the United States. We did not have the hospital capacity to actually treat people. And that's something that speaks to a very urgent problem in the country. Our healthcare system was broken before COVID, and it's been made worse. I would, as a Prime Minister, do something that some people think is attacking a sacred cow, especially federal Liberals. I would table a new Canada Health Act. I would allow the provinces to innovate. I'd untie their hands and allow them to bring in private sector care and remaining with a single payer so that we have a healthcare system to deliver services. And why? So that we not have lockdowns. So that we have a healthcare system that has the ability to absorb people who are sick, whether it's COVID or anything else. Now, right now, the confusion is, and the federal government, we have to admit, is broken right now. Can't deliver passports. Airports are a mess. The immigration department has a huge backlog. Michelle and I, my wife is with me. We traveled over here. She's on me every day. Put the mask on. Take the mask off at the airport. We walk through the desk. No mask. We go for security, have a mask. Take off security, take the mask off. Put it back on. Get on the plane, put on the mask. And that's all federal. It's total confusion. It doesn't make sense. In the meantime, everywhere else here in Alberta and in Quebec and everywhere else, you don't wear a mask. I get it. The federal government, I don't know what game they're playing with this, but it doesn't make sense. And on this issue, now we're going to go through different waves. I think we're not going to go back into lockdowns, but please, let's have the courage and wherewithal to fix our healthcare system so that we don't have to contemplate the worst of solutions to deal with an epidemic.
So I appreciate your answer around healthcare reform. That would obviously be a monumental change.
Yes.
And ICU capacity was one of the big distinguishing factors. I don't want to get my numbers wrong, but little Montana, with about a quarter of our population just south of us, had the same ICU capacity as Alberta.
Exactly.
And that should say something. And that obviously means we have a greater stress on our system than the Americans had, and that would contribute to things like lockdowns, mask mandates, vaccine mandates. But I have to press. So within the lockdowns were pretty much provincial, but vaccine mandates were federal and provincial. When they brought in vaccine mandates, I suppose September last year, I'm sure it had nothing to do with election timing, but
not much, no.
Yeah, do you believe that there was ever any justification for federal vaccine mandates for, say, federal workers or travel?
There was a lot of reasons to encourage people to get vaccinated. I got vaccinated, by the way. 3 times I got vaccinated. And I got COVID, by the way. It didn't stop me from getting COVID. But let me share an experience that gives you my perspective on it. In the province of Quebec, Legault gets this idea that everyone in the healthcare system has to be vaccinated. Everyone, no exceptions. And then they go out there and every week they pound it. We have until, I think it was the 15th of November. Not vaccinated, you're going to be fired. Well, guess what? They backed off because there were going to be 15,000 people in that system who were walking away from their jobs. And then they said, well, you know what? We can't afford to let them go. Now, truckers, who were the heroes of the COVID, period, and celebrated, and rightfully so. Rightfully so. They're the ones carrying goods, and all of a sudden we discovered how valuable those who in their economy were either on trucking or working in shops or other words were. And then he comes in with this rule. Well, I don't think it works. So looking into the future, Derek, I don't see how you can impose it on everyone, because it's just not going to work, and we're going to hamper our ability to deal. There's other ways of working around it and making sure that we do as much as we can so that people have the ability to choose to protect their health and protect those around them.
So I've got the 5-minute warning on our chat here.
Okay.
So what I'm going to try and be brief, and if you can too, I'm going to try and get 2 questions. We're going to This is the lightning round.
I heard your warning.
All right. This question is a little self-interested, maybe a lot. In addition to the CBC, the federal government now directly subsidizes virtually the entire media, all the legacy media, and even a lot of the independent media. This means that independents like the Western Standard and some of the other independents here today, we're subsidizing massive, even multinational corporations that are media corporations with our corporate income taxes. And even more concerning, it means that the federal government now is in essentially the media licensing business. We went through it for fun just to see what would happen, and it was positively Orwellian. We also got the Online News Act coming, which would force social media giants to give preferential ranking and feeds to government-approved media. If you're elected prime minister, where would you stand on the media bailouts and the Online News Act? Would those be pieces of legislation you'd be prepared to do away with?
And congratulations, you do not receive any federal government money.
No.
And your subscribers are the ones who support what you do. And
we're stuck with them, yeah.
Well, and they're stuck with you. And so it's a two-way street, Derek. And so that's what I believe in. And I, as a conservative and someone who believes in the freedom of the press, I find it very difficult to accept federal government is funding. And can you actually look at a society in which the federal government's funding the press and the press is independent? They can say they're independent as much as they can and keep a distance. I find it difficult to accept that. So I would not fund the press. I don't think that's acceptable. And I'm here, by the way, I'm here with Western Standard because I also believe in the independent press.
Well, thank you. In 2020, the federal Liberals used the cabinet, an order in council, to ban about 1,500 different firearms that they claim were military or assault-style rifles. This include some anti-tank missiles that I didn't know weren't banned until now. I really wish I would have known. I got my hands on some Russian anti-aircraft missiles. You don't know what we get up to in Alberta. But many of these were just otherwise normal hunting and sport shooting rifles, but largely just that had an appearance that looks scary to the uninitiated. But you said several months ago you would not change any firearms legislation. Since then, but since your announcement, the Liberals have also said they're going to bring in a bill to ban the sale of handguns. Does this mean you would not reverse the ban on what the so-called military or assault style? If you could maybe clear that up and tell us, where do you stand on the changes between the Liberals on the 1,500 guns and then the handgun changes they say they're going to make? You're Prime Minister. What are you going to do on those two fronts?
Well, let me touch the essential points. The issue on guns in Canada is illegal handguns in cities. That's the issue today in this country. We have a home in Montreal. There's not a day, literally not a day where there isn't a shooting in plain daylight. I mean, people are shocked by that. That's what the federal government needs to deal with and make sure that we stop the illegal commerce of these illegal handguns coming in. Number two, this OIC should be revised by experts who are independent from the government and politics and really define what it is that they call an assault and weapons. And you know what? We're going to end up with a much smaller list than what we have in terms of the federal government's baiting.
So the anti-aircraft missiles stay banned.
We'll have to see. The experts will pronounce on that. Mm-hmm. By the way, just an anecdote of that. The 97 campaign, some of you may remember, Jean Chrétien made a statement. He was running for as Liberal Prime Minister that we had to stop children having nuclear weapons in the basement of their families' homes. I mean, it was, and then the third thing I would add about all of this is something for Conservatives. Every time we get an election campaign, the Liberals bait us on handguns every time. And you know what? Every time we take the bait. I'm going to run as a leader of a party and in the next campaign on my agenda for the economy. And I'm very determined that there's one thing we're not going to do is run on the issues that the Liberals are going to throw at us. And we're going to stop. It's gotten to the point where I'm convinced now that Conservatives are the most generous political party in the world. They go into election campaigns, they actually give it away to the Liberals. The Liberals don't win campaigns, we lose them, and we give it to them. But can we agree on one thing, on the whole issue? They will trot it out again. I guarantee you this will be an issue. They will want to make this an issue because that is exactly the way that they operate in a campaign. So all of us agree on what the main problem is in terms of guns. Please, let's focus on the things that we believe in as opposed to responding to our adversaries' taunts. Thank you, Derek.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
I'll let you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Charest. I'm going to introduce our next candidate here. Scott Aitchison was born in Huntsville, Ontario. At the age of just 21, he was elected to the council of his hometown and served in different municipal offices until being elected the mayor of Huntsville in 2014. During this time, he worked in real estate and in consulting. Since being elected to the House of Commons in 2021 as a Conservative, he was appointed the Shadow Minister of Labour for the official opposition. So please join me in welcoming to the stage Mr. Scott Aitchison.
Good job, as always.
run.
Thank you. Sorry.
That's okay.
I had to shake hands with Jean Charest.
I think he
It's
drank
a
that
big
water.
deal.
I think he was drinking from that.
You got over COVID, eh? I can just drink out of that one? You good? Okay, good.
Scott, thanks for joining us. I think it's fair to say, you might not be the most known of the candidates. So I think part of what this is trying to help people get to know you.
Scott, nice to meet you all.
Say hi, Scott. Sounds like an AA meeting. Great.
As this campaign began, I think it's probably safe to say that nobody knew me outside of Perry Sound Muskoka, but that's changing rapidly.
So you might not be that well known, but you do have a long history in local politics, and it's often said but seldom understood that local politics is where things actually happen. It actually affects people's lives the most. So you've been on council a long time. You've been the mayor of Huntsville. You've made the trek out here to Calgary to make the case for getting the support of Western conservatives. What is it that you are offering Western voters that none of the other candidates are right now?
In a short sentence, it's years and years of experience of getting things done, solving problems, fixing things, actually focused on changing things for the better for people without any Ottawa baggage. Ottawa is a broken place. John made that point very well, I think, that the partisan political rancor that goes on there is disgusting. And that was probably one of the first things I noticed when I got there, that I just simply could not believe the penchant for, just the next great line that'll play well on your Twitter feed versus actually solving problems and focusing on getting things done for Canadians. And so I think Canada's ready for some small town mayor who actually focuses on doing things. Things like the housing crisis that exists in our country. It's everywhere. These Liberals have promised billions and billions and billions of dollars, literally over the last 7 years, and have not solved the problem. They haven't moved the needle. The CMHC has made that very clear. They haven't moved the needle. They've never got anything done.
I appreciate that, but my question is more geared to the West specifically. I mean, it's a big country. It's very diverse, and we hardly agree on what the time of day is sometimes. But it's the Western Standard debate. We're trying to we're holding this because we want to focus on Western issues. And obviously, these things have national resonance.
Right.
National issues are often Western issues. Western issues are national issues. But speaking more to Western issues, and you can define that broadly. But what is it you're offering to Westerners, kind of addressing some of the concerns that are maybe more acute here to Albertans, Saskatchewans? I always have trouble calling them, and British Columbians.
Right.
You want to address, their more specific concerns. What is it you're offering that others aren't?
Yeah, I think that's part of, I guess, what I offer is that I'm not an Ottawa-centric guy. I'm actually just a small town mayor. One of the first things I did when I became a federal member of parliament is the first trip I was able to do, keeping in mind that COVID had started, is I came to Calgary. I came to visit my colleague Tom Kimmich, came to visit Greg McLean, and I wanted to, visit and learn more about what's going on here. And I was surprised and dismayed, I guess, at the number of people that said, sorry, you're from Ontario? And what are you doing here? They just didn't get it. They said, people in Ontario don't care about us. And that's fundamentally what I think we need to change. I do care very much about what goes on here in Alberta. Alberta is the economic engine of our country. And I think Albertans are tired of feeling used. And that's the kind of leadership that I bring. I'll be here and in making sure that I run an inclusive, engaged, and involved government that includes all parts of the country, especially the West.
So let's talk about that specifically. Equalization is a huge issue in Alberta, and it's increasingly an issue in British Columbia and Saskatchewan, maybe less so in Manitoba. Maybe I've missed it, but I haven't heard you make any proposals around equalization. Forgive me if I have missed it. Mm-hmm. Alberta held a referendum last fall to abolish equalization from the Constitution. It was a pretty resounding majority, despite some problems with the government at the time. How do you respond from the demand of a large majority of Albertans to abolish equalization? You're in the Prime Minister's chair. How are you responding to
that? Yeah, I think it'd be tough to abolish equalization. It's one of the founding principles of why the provinces got together and created this federal government in the first place.
Well, actually, I believe it was added to the Constitution in the 1930s. I don't mean to be pedantic, but it wasn't
always
there.
But in fact, an equalization formula started almost instantly. One of the reasons the provinces came together to create this federal government was to help, frankly, with some of the issues related to debt. The federal government was born with 75 million of the $80 million worth of debt that the colonies, provinces had. It was created in part to help ease the burden and spread some of the wealth. So it exists. But the problem is, of course, is you've got generation after generation of federal governments and politicians that are constantly trying to buy votes in different parts of the country. And they use the equalization formula and they play around with it, and it's been changed over and over and over again to buy votes where they want to buy the votes. And this is, frankly, the problem with our federalism. Jean spoke to it, I think, very well about the fact that the provinces actually run this country. They do. And it was designed that way. I think it's time for us to get back to how the founders actually envisioned this country in the first place. And so I say, yes, we need to meet with all the premiers, but we need to take a look at that equalization formula and bring it back into how it was envisioned initially. No more special deals. This is one area where I actually disagree with my friend Jean Charest. It's time for the special deals is over. No more special deals for Quebec. Albertans don't want a special deal. They just want a fair deal that everybody gets the same deal. That's what I fight for.
All right. I think, I know I'm paraphrasing, but Ernest Manning, who was the premier of Alberta for many, many years with the social credit, hey, we got a fresh water for you. He,
a big one too.
He was around when they were putting the equalization formula together, and I recall he said something along the lines of, the premiers were told, just said, here's how much we want. Ottawa, just go find a formula to make it happen. And it's been a very Byzantine formula the entire time.
It doesn't make any sense.
Probably less than, even those of us who think we understand it probably don't entirely. It's quite complicated. Your campaign is really focused on trying to unite Conservatives and have maybe a more civil discussion. But in trying to be the nice guy, your campaign maybe carries a risk of being the Switzerland candidate, caught between the big guys, trying to bring everyone to peace. And that maybe carries the risk of maybe being lost in the noise between maybe the different kind of polar opposites within the campaign. How do you stand out from the other candidates on the big issues that have largely defined this campaign?
I think the fact that I've actually focused on the issues very specifically. I think some of the other campaigns have focused on each other, and I've focused on issues very specifically and come up with specific ideas to solve those problems, whether it's the housing crisis. I've come up with very specific policy proposals. I actually understand it pretty well, having done the real estate business and been a municipal politician. I know it well. I've come up with some very specific policy proposals on addressing some of the sacred cows that exist in our system, like supply management. I think it's time for us to move away from that system.
That's my favorite.
It's time for us to move away from that system. I think it's going to be chipped away at every new trade deal we do. And it's time for us to actually be honest with ourselves and say we need to create new markets, which again is another one of the reasons we created this federal government, to create new markets for our world-class dairy products around the world and create some competition because we have to make food more affordable for Canadians. It's getting tougher and tougher to feed our families. Inflation's out of control. So I'm putting together this very specific policy proposal. I'm not talking about the other candidates. I'm talking about ideas that actually are solutions to problems.
Okay, well, I had that as my last question if we had time. We're going to go straight to that one now. Those who know me know that it's a real, it might not be the biggest, most pressing political issue in Canada, but I think it's difficult for Conservatives to look someone in the eye and say, I believe in free enterprise, except for this entire section of the economy that should be run along Soviet lines. But it's obviously fraught with political risk. It's obviously had impact on previous Conservative leadership campaigns. I think this issue, unless I'm missing something from the other candidates, I think you perhaps stand alone. Maybe we missed something with Roman before.
Roman, I think, is
Roman, I think, is actually mentioned on the Corey Morgan show as well. Why do you believe the Conservatives have to get around this issue, supply management in particular, because it is probably the most powerful lobby in Canada. It is extremely able to, it can exert its influence on the pressure points in Canadian politics. And you're obviously, you're playing with fire doing it, but I think it's clearly something that needs to be addressed. Why do you think Conservatives need to address it?
Well, I think individual Canadians' voices should matter more than the lobbyists, for starters, and that needs to change. But I think this is one of those issues that it's as I call it a sacred cow. But it is because of the lobbyists, and it is because They've created this system that provides stability. I understand that, provides security, and they like that. There's no question about that. But I haven't tried to demonize farmers either. I think our farmers have done an amazing job of creating a system where they produce literally world-class products within a system that is flawed. And I'm not suggesting for a second we throw farmers to the wolves either. I'm thinking we need to transition away. We need to create new markets, and we need to do it in a rational, responsible way. And it won't be cheap, but it's something that we have to do, because I think that it's also important to introduce competition into the market as well. Because frankly, I think the biggest issue that Canadians face across this country right now is an affordability crisis, and we need to make food cheaper.
As I was talking about with Mr. Charest, from 2020 to 2022, we've had a long series of lockdowns from the provinces, mandates federally and provincially. It has hugely divided Canadians, but it has especially divided Conservatives. It has been, left-leaning parties have generally not had the kind of party discipline issues and unity issues the parties on the center right and the right have. Because it's been framed by many, and I have to admit, me too, as very much a lot of authoritarianism coming in. And so it divides Conservatives, sometimes along traditional Conservative and libertarian lines. You've portrayed yourself as someone able to unite Conservatives and find compromise that, comes from experience in municipal politics. But this issue is probably a little less maybe prone to compromise. One side sees the other as, maybe racist, sexist, anti-science, and selfish, and the other side sees the other as heartless, cold, authoritarian. And so there doesn't seem to be a lot of room for compromise on something that has become so incredibly polarizing. Do you believe you'd be able to find a satisfactory compromise on this kind of issue that would be able to keep Conservatives together, where perhaps Aaron O'Toole and Jason Kenney could not?
Yeah, and I think, and this is where it has to begin. And this is part of the problem with our politics overall for several generations now. But I think one of the reasons why this became such a difficult issue is because Justin Trudeau turned it into an issue that way. He chose to demonize Canadians who chose not to get vaccinated to try to win votes with those who are vaccinated. That's disgusting. It should never have happened. But that's how our politics works in this country. We seek to capitalize as politicians on the differences of opinion that exist, whether it's east versus west, urban versus rural, vaccinated versus unvaccinated, and demonize people. So to me, that's something that should never have happened. It's something that I would never to operate as a prime minister. I believe that it's time to start calling this country together, all the things that do unite us. The other issue here too, though, is that when it came to this issue, I think Mr. Charest spoke about this very well also. Nobody had a playbook. We didn't really know what we were facing. And I think it's important for us to remember that freedom is absolutely fundamental to our society. But with freedom comes responsibility. And so in my mind, thank you, what I said about COVID all along has been this. I trust my doctor. I trusted him when he told me I needed to have surgery. I trusted him when he said, you need to get this vaccination. Okay. But I also respect the rights of other Canadians to choose their medical choices. Mm-hmm. That is a fundamental right as well. And so I also believe, and trust me, I hated wearing a mask. And I am just as frustrated as Mr. Charest getting on a plane and off a plane. I complain about Justin Trudeau quite vigorously on the plane when I do it. But if I have to wear a mask a little bit longer to respect your choice not to get a vaccination, then I'm prepared to do that. And I think we should all be prepared to do that, to respect your choice and make sure that we get through something like a pandemic that we don't entirely understand, and make sure that we get through it. Mr. Charest also made the very good point about our healthcare system. And this is another one of those areas of federal responsibility where we created a system in the 60s predicated on a promise where the federal government will pay 50% of the cost, and we've promptly never lived up to that promise. We have a broken healthcare system, and we wear it as this badge of honor like we have the best system in the world, and it simply is not. And the federal government needs to stop meddling in provincial affairs, promising to pay 50% of the costs, and get back to the job that it was created for in the first place, like creating new markets for our dairy products, like focusing on spending 2% of GDP.
I'm going to follow your side. Yeah. I want to follow your sidewinder here, and onto healthcare here. would you be willing to amend the Canada Health Act to allow private delivery of services with or without the single payer system?
Absolutely, 1,000%. That needs to happen. In fact, we need to drive more private delivery of services into the single payer system to create those efficiencies. Ontario did a reasonably good job of creating some efficiencies within their system through their funding formula that drives. Basically, the funding formula is driven by volume, and so that's driven some efficiencies into the system. But we need more of that, and we need more private care. And frankly, the federal government needs to pony up its share of what it promised to share in the first place, which is never done. And so, if we did that, then the provinces wouldn't be facing fiscal unsustainability either. So it needs to be reopened, and the federal government needs to come to the table with its promised share to make sure that we have a system that doesn't have to be locked down to save it, like we did through this COVID-19 business.
So right now, the boundaries of the seats in the House of Commons are being redrawn and redistributed based on population changes. The Bloc Québécois put forward a motion that would override the legislated formula that would give Quebec an extra seat that its shrinking population does not warrant. This comes at the direct expense of provinces that are growing in population like British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan. Yeah. All of the parties, except for the Conservatives, voted pretty much all for this. The Conservatives, however, were divided. I did a little research on this. I think you voted against it.
I was one of the few that voted against it. Absolutely.
I want you to maybe explain why you did that, because the Conservatives were divided pretty sharply along those lines. Why did you vote against that? Obviously, it's going to be a popular vote to vote against that here in Alberta, but tell us about it.
It's another example of special deals for different regions of the country. Either we believe in representation by population, or we don't. I believe in representation by population. I used to have this argument when I was the mayor of Huntsville. In Muskoka, it's a region of lakes and really, very outrageously expensive cottages that exist on waterfront properties. And the townships always felt like they paid the biggest freight, and so they should have more votes. And I said, well, that's representation by wealth. I don't agree with that either. Representation by population, full stop.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, after that softball, I'm going to give you a little tougher here.
Okay.
Canada's not run a balanced budget since 2008. Under both Liberal and Conservatives governments, we've run a long stream of deficits. They're now just much larger, wildly out of control. The last election, however, the Conservative Party under Erin O'Toole did not run on a balanced budget. They paid some kind of lip service to it, but there was nothing even vaguely representing a credible plan to return to balanced budget in any kind of realistic time frame. As Prime Minister, would you balance the budget within your first term? And if so, what are the key action items you would take to get there?
The answer is a guarded yes. I think it's absolutely possible. I think it's possible. It would be possible to balance it now. The economy is firing on all cylinders, and yet this Liberal government borrowed another, $50 billion because they think they need to stimulate the economy. Mm-hmm. In fact, it probably could be balanced within that first mandate based on what's going on in this country. There's no question that this government, this current Liberal government, has borrowed way too much money. But it's also important to acknowledge that there's good debt and bad debt. If we're borrowing to invest to grow the economy, that's one thing. But this government just spends recklessly and continues to grow the federal public service with reckless abandon. And honestly, we need some smart fiscal managers to rein in the spending and focus on the core responsibilities the federal government was created for.
Now, the economy is firing pretty hot right now, but the deficits are so massive that it's unlikely that economic growth alone is going to get us there. Yeah. I think it's fair to say there's going to need to be, perhaps even beyond spending restraints, some spending cuts, because we're spending more now, we're borrowing more now than we have, and even at the highest point of the Second World War or the First World War, it's at record levels. Are you prepared to cut spending if necessary to get there? And if so, what are some of the significant items that you would put on the block?
Well, I think in what is now an over $400 billion budget, there's lots of room to trim, not cut, to rein spending in. And
this is Calgary. We want cut.
Yeah, well, I get that. But I couldn't tell you what I would cut, other than I would say we need to trim in a lot of areas. the Liberal government has grown the federal civil service outrageously so, and we need to rein that in. There's no need to have the bureaucracies we have. And again, I come back to this issue of if we were to live up to the original promise on our healthcare spending, we could get out of an awful lot of other businesses that we meddle in the provincial responsibilities now, and we wouldn't need bureaucracies to try to manage what we're trying to do in provincial jurisdiction. Think about how many bureaucrats there are between the provinces and the federal government to determine how much money the federal government is giving the province, whether the province got enough money, and whether this was done right. So they have to go back to the bureaucracy here for this, and back and forth, back and forth. The fact is, bureaucracies giving money back and forth to each other costs us billions. Let's just stop that.
I want to make sure I understand something you said. Are you proposing that the original Canada Health Act and the agreement with the provinces was 50-50? We're obviously nowhere near that. But for Ottawa to meet that obligation, which was supposed to from the 60s, Pearson, that would be a massive increase in federal spending. If I understand you correctly, were you saying that the federal government should be paying 50-50?
And I think that would be part of the discussion. Absolutely. I think that if we did that, then the provinces could afford to deliver all the other services that we meddle in now. We could get out of all those other businesses. Right now, there's no reason for the federal government to be involved, funding over here for this social program, funding for that, funding for education. We fund all these different little areas, and it's a constant fight about how much we give. If we focused on the original promise and renegotiated the Canada Health Act, and we could eliminate huge swaths of a federal bureaucracy meddling in provincial affairs.
So I want to kind of bring it back to more specifically Western issues right now. Alberta last fall, in addition to the equalization referendum, we had municipal elections and a Senate election. Every once in a while, the rest of Canada kind of cocks its head sideways and says, what the heck is that? We had a Senate election, and to the surprise of everyone, 3 Conservatives won. Now, it's been the long-standing policy of Conservative prime ministers going back to at least the later part of Brian Mulroney, when we were in the kind of the middle of Meech Lake and Charlottetown, that they would appoint provincially elected senators or senators in waiting, if you call them what you will. My question is two-part. One is, would you honor that if you're prime minister? Would you appoint elected Alberta Conservatives to the Senate? And second, and I know this is a bit of a Pandora's box here, would you entertain the idea of more fundamental Senate reform? Right now, Alberta, with the population of greater than all 4 Atlantic provinces combined, has less seats than just New Brunswick or just Nova Scotia. It's quite the opposite of representation by population. It's like the inverse of how much money you pay is the seats you get. It doesn't really make much sense. It's almost medieval. But I understand that's a constitutional Pandora's box. So two parts of that question.
It is. I'd be inclined to honor the elections. I haven't given it a lot of thought because it is a quagmire, and I think Stephen Harper tried his level best to reform it and really didn't get very far with it. And so constitutional discussions in this country are difficult, and Monsieur Charest's got the scars on his back to prove it.
If I had time, I was going to ask him that one too.
And so it is a difficult thing. I think that I would focus more on fixing the things that you can fix, as opposed to tackling issues like that take you down a rabbit hole and you don't ever get solved.
So major Senate reform would be more or less off the table, which is, I think, a fairly standard position because it is a quagmire. But appointing elected senators to the Senate, that is something.
Yeah, I'd be inclined to support that. Yeah.
All right. Is there anything else you want to leave us with before we're done? You're actually so good at answering questions. I didn't have to bring it back to it.
My campaign team tells me, stop answering questions. Focus on your own issue. Well, no, I don't really have anything else to say other than I've really enjoyed this very much. I appreciate the opportunity. I've enjoyed getting to know my fellow candidates better. I've enjoyed getting to know Canadians and Conservatives across the country better. And I'm proud of what we're doing. And I'm looking forward to continuing right through till September the 10th.
Well, thank you very much for joining us today,
Thank you.
Good luck on the campaign trail.
Thanks. Appreciate it. I'll take that with me.
Our next candidate is Roman Baber. Roman Baber is a relative newcomer to politics, but he has come out of the gate like a stampede bucking horse. He was born far behind the Iron Curtain in the Soviet Union. When he was 8 years old, he and his family emigrated to Israel and then to Canada when he was 15. He made his career as a lawyer before winning a seat in the Ontario legislature as a progressive conservative in 2018. But when COVID-19 hit our shores in 2020, governments across Canada began a series of lockdowns and other restrictions on liberties that shocked many, few more than Mr. Roman Baber. He became an outspoken critic of his own government's policies, something that earned him an expulsion from the Ontario Progressive Conservative Caucus by that province's Premier Doug Ford. Since then, Mr. Baber has taken his fight national and thrown his hat into the ring for the leadership of the Conservative Party of Canada. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Mr. Roman Baber.
Thank you.
For the record, I told him to bring a hat. But as Calgary, Alberta politicians will know, it's important to put it on the right direction.
You don't like the look?
Oh, no, that was a Rachel Notley joke. No, it's not about you. All right. Well, hardy har. Thanks for joining us. Western tensions, we have a lot of tension with Quebec. It gets a lot of attention, as I discussed with Mr. Charest. But a secret you're going to find here at the Stampede is the ones we really got a beef with is Toronto. And it's not just the Leafs. But you were elected as a member of the provincial legislature, member of provincial parliament to the Ontario legislature, representing a Toronto constituency. Conservatives put a lot of effort into fighting for seats in the GTA. Because that's where the votes are, and they swing back and forth. That's where the elections are decided. And the West largely gets taken for granted. That's Saskatchewan, Alberta, and the interior of BC. The part of BC we consider part of the West, except for the westernmost part. Why should Albertans trust you as a Conservative leader to not take them for granted the way we have often felt in the past?
I think I've been blessed to develop my reputation on the basis of trust. Is that Canadians can count on me to make a difficult decision, even when the balance of the political class will not. And it's well known that you might disagree with what I have to say, and that's fine. That's democracy. But at the very least, you'll always know where I stand. I take pride in the fact that I won a key North Toronto riding. It's exemplary of the fact that Conservatives can win in the city, and Prime Minister Harper understood very well, and in fact, multiple times said that you can't win a national election without making a strong gain inside the GTA, and I believe that I'm able to do so. We have to speak to many communities that call urban centers home, and we have to speak about their issues without fear, whether it's housing, whether it's transit. I think we also have to speak to young people on issues that affect them most, and we have to be willing to speak to new communities. I'm an immigrant to Canada. I've had every blessing that Canada had to offer. And I think that immigrants come to Canada for democracy and opportunity, which are the themes of my campaign. Those are actually conservative principles, and we should not be ceding them to the Liberals. So I think I'm actually very excited about the prospect of leading an election and winning in the cities. But as it comes to the West, I love Canada coast to coast. I think people know that very, very well. And it's now my third time in Alberta during this race. And I'm very, very optimistic that I'll be able to deliver for Alberta and the rest of Western Canada, if you'll permit that to be the next question.
I know you got something to say on equalization, and I'll ask you to hold that, keep that one in the chamber for now. So I want to talk about the feeling of being taken for granted here, especially conservative Westerners, Albertans, interior BC, Saskatchewan, the feeling that our votes are in the bag. You guys could do anything and we're still going to vote conservative. And so as a result, we're just not, we're not a battleground state, to use the American parlance. The GTA is where it's at, and then some parts in around Vancouver and here and there, like those swing areas, they get the attention because that's strategically smart. That's where you want to spend your time and your money in campaigns. But that's really where the focus is. And as a result, there's a big feeling in the West that we're taken for granted. Hold on equalization for a second, but what would you do as the conservative leader to to make Westerners feel that that vote isn't just in the bag and taken for granted?
First of all, I think that the best thing we can do to unite our country and heal regional divides is to unleash our economic opportunity, and that means availing ourselves of Canada's natural resources. I think that Canada's natural resources are a blessing. I'm not going to let oil and gas be cancelled, and I'll encourage pedal to the metal on natural resources. You will never have to worry about production or being able to transport your oil. I think all of Canada benefits from Alberta's energy, and so that's something I'll encourage. Second of all, I will speak to equalization separately, but it's well known that I have committed to abolish equalization before the end of my first term and provide a tax cut, a corresponding tax cut across the board. Third, I believe in the principle that all Canadian votes should be weighed equally. The fact that we have close to ridings in Calgary and one in Edmonton, close to 150,000 by population. We have electoral districts in other provinces between 50 and 70, some even with 35, 40,000 voters. And so I think that it's rightful for every Canadian to expect that their voice and vote is weighed equally. And finally, it's the recognition. I had dinner yesterday with a group of folks here in Calgary, and a woman said to me, it's as if they come and we're used, and then they come back and then they punch us in the guts. And I think that we need to speak about the fact clearly that there are not just regional divides, but there are sentiments of separation that need to concern every Canadian. And it's not just taking your vote for granted, but making sure that you remain part and parcel and an important part of the Confederation. I'm committed to that.
And actually, I'm going to come back to those feelings around secession in a bit, but I'm going to let you out of the gate now. I know what you want to talk about.
Mandates and lockdowns?
Hold your horses. Equalization is a big issue here. As I mentioned with Scott, Albertans held a referendum in the fall to abolish it, but it was like a tree falling in the forest. No one heard it. I think a lot of that was perhaps the provincial government was kind of consumed by internal political chaos and didn't really try to do much about it. It just didn't really have much political capital. But either way, Albertans expressed themselves in a referendum to remove equalization from the Constitution. I know you've got a pretty, I'll say bold, some would say brash, policy for equalization. What are you going to do?
Brash is not a term that I typically get described as. Look, I love Canada's Constitution and I lecture on it occasionally. Section 36 of the Constitution prescribes that the federal government is committed to the principle of equalization to ensure that each province is able to deliver a comparable level of services. So I think that it be rightfully interpreted that the section is somewhat conditional. And the condition precedent that you must meet is that a province is unable to provide a comparable level of service. Well, what if we go out there and we determine that provinces are in fact able to provide comparable levels of service? And what is a comparable level of service? If one province has $7 or $8 a day daycare, that's a very different type of service that another province might provide. And what if we were to go out and say, well, wait a minute, even if we were to concede that someone is unable to provide a comparable level of service, well, why not? And should their unwillingness in develop their natural resources, for instance, come at the expense of other provinces needing to pay equalization? So I know my way around the courtroom. I don't think that we'll need litigation. But what I will do is on day one, I'll invite the provinces and I'll say, look, let's have a review as to whether you're actually able to provide a comparable level of services. If you cannot, then let's work to unlock your natural resources before the end of my first term, because it's time to do away with it. I'm running against socialism in Canada. I think that getting rid of equalization is going to help heal regional divides. But most importantly, I think that we need to turn Canada into the national resources superpower that we ought to be. And ending equalization is an important way to get there.
So let's go a bit beyond equalization is the one that gets a lot of attention, but it's not just that. A lot of the concern is around federal overreach in many things. Anger ranges from being able to keep more money, but putting up firewalls, demands. And to demands for outright independence among some. Depends which poll you're looking at. But last October, we commissioned Main Street to do a poll around support for independence. Support in Alberta for independence was at 40%. If combined with other Western provinces, it was up to 45%. Other provinces, other pollsters have put it lower. I think it depends if you call it independence or separatism. I think it's like calling someone newly single or divorced. It's the same thing, but has a different connotation. So it depends how you ask the question. Either way, there is a significant minority of Albertans who are moving from the West wants in to the West wants out. Beyond your proposal to abolish equalization, what would you do to ensure the West is in and wants to stay in?
Look, offering a meaningful national conversation. As I've said before, I think many folks, especially in Ottawa, do not appreciate that there is life outside of Quebec and Ontario. And I think it's time for us not to just recognize that there's so much strength in our diversity, but also in the fact that we need our country together and united. We're facing unprecedented challenges around the world, and this would be devastating for Canada to suffer any type of exit. And so beyond equalization, I will certainly look at the representation formula. I think it needs to be simplified considerably. I read a lot of text and I'm having difficulty consuming that text. The only exception I would make is maybe for provinces and territories. I will not have a situation where a territory does not have at least one MP. I think that that's probably sensible. But beyond that, I think that we need a fair representation formula. As I said, natural resources is a gateway, but also I think in the last couple of years, and people know that I've been very passionate about what's been happening to our country vis-a-vis the division that the Prime Minister has been peddling. And at the very least, if we had government extricate itself out of our lives to the extent that it's still much involved in public health, to the extent that it still stirs division among Canadians, I think we're all going to simmer down, we're going to take a deep breath, and we're going to start working again, loving each other again, being kind again, something that I think that's been missing for the last couple of years. I have optimism for the future of our country, united.
So I want you to take a deep breath for this question. Lockdowns, forced masking, mandatory vaccines. I think your fight against this kind of government overreach has defined your candidacy more than any other suite of issues. You spoke against these issues when you were a member of the Ontario Progressive Conservative government, and it earned you an expulsion for it. And I think, I'd not be the only one in the room who recognizes that was quite a sacrifice to pay for a point of principle. But now you're taking your fight national.
Derek, it wasn't for principle. It was for human lives. The idea was not to compromise lives by suggesting, if you look at my 2-page letter of January 15th to the Premier, 2021, there's maybe less than a line in there about the economy. The idea was that we have to factor in the toll, the collateral harm of lockdowns into our public health exercise because we're potentially costing lives. Mm-hmm. And regretfully, the evidence is bearing the case.
So your fight when you got started was provincial, but you're national now. Okay, I'll let you guys go. I could just see them itching over there. Okay. You're now federal. The lockdowns were pretty much provincial, but mandates, masks and vaccines obviously are a big part federally. So leaving aside the provincial stuff, because you're in the national stage now, what would you do as Prime Minister to ensure those kinds of restrictions on freedoms never happen again?
Right. So a couple of things. I've enjoyed listening to my friends today about their proposals for the Canada Health Act. And it's good that we have a vibrant race of ideas and we have courage to go places we haven't gone before. That's great. And I do support a reform that would provide for more private delivery systems with a single payer. But at the same time, I will also amend the Canada Health Act to provide that we can never have discrimination against a Canadian because of their medical status, ever. I would think, but beyond that, the fight has not just been about mandates and choice and lockdowns. It's been about the culture, in fact, the political correctness, the radical cancel culture that precipitated this public health exercise. And part of it was foreclosing on discussion, right? You can't just tap your chest and yell freedom. And to those that try to make this argument as simplistic as freedom versus mandates or freedom versus health, that respectfully, I don't think is the right prism. I would propose that we're sensible people and intelligent, and we can have a conversation if conversation is permitted. Freedom is not absolute. Liberty is prescribed in Section 7, but we still incarcerate people if we believe that democratically established principles warrant so. So I didn't say we have to fight for freedom. I said it's up to government the government carries the burden if it's going to engage in this remarkable action of foreclosing on our freedoms. And I don't believe that the case actually warrants so. We knew very early on that 80% of the risk is in long-term care homes. We knew that the virus is considerably more transmissible, making some of the metrics that we're worried about, like hospitalization and death, considerably lower. Let's reassess the risk. Instead, we continue to operate as if we're still stuck in March or April 2020. And so once we actually look at some of the metrics and appreciate what we've learned, thankfully, then there was no reason to engage in this remarkable public health exercise that was so devastating and will be devastating, I think, for generations, especially on our children who will regress considerably. So that brings me back to your question on democracy, which is allow for discussion. And that means I will eliminate all the preconditions that precipitated what had transpired. And that is the limit on our ability to communicate, whether it's in Parliament. I suffered from a deficit of democracy in Parliament, our ability to communicate on social media. I will enter into an arrangement with social media giants to ensure that we're not going to be abridging the right of Canadians to free speech online. I will protect regulated professionals, certainly federal ones, and through agreement with the provinces. And I will ensure that we have free and independent media, because you can't have free and independent media when the government signs the media's paycheck.
So let me ask this next question.
Sure. I apologize.
I'm happy with my segues here. Freedom has been a major theme of your campaign. And so I want to talk about freedom of the press and freedom of expression.
Yeah.
The federal government now subsidizes nearly the entire Canadian media. They can pull, it means now that they're essentially licensing media, going through their content, saying, are you good media, are you bad media? And the government can pull your funding at any time. And, I think a lot of journalists who are in that media, they're doing their best. But there's got to be, at least in more of the business side and the publishers, there's got to be that sort of Damocles hanging over them that if they cross some line, the government's going to pull their funding and they're in trouble. And I think that's got clear and obvious consequences. We've now got the Online News Act, forcibly, forced certain ranking of government-approved news sources, the Online Harms Act, censoring users, the Online Streaming Act to create taxes on independent content creators to redistribute it to big ones to create CanCon that no one will probably watch. It's a large suite of legislation, and I know it's a lot to take in. But if you're Prime Minister, what would be the fate of these bills and the media bailout?
I will defund and I'll spin off CBC by lunchtime. That's easy. So I
don't think they like that.
But beyond that, I'll go a step further. Of course, I'll end all media bailouts and all media subsidies. But you have to go a step further. One of the new phenomena we witnessed in the last couple of years is the record buys of government, of advertising buys by government in the media.
I don't know where that was. We didn't get it.
And that's been prevalent throughout. And many of that advertising was also self-serving. And that is not just anti-democratic, I think it's just shameful that we would spend taxpayer money to promote our own government agenda. So I'm going to limit and end. If I may, so as you said, I was born in the former Soviet Union. I still remember there's a newspaper called Pravda, and Pravda means truth, which ironic in and of itself. So they would plaster Pravda all over, and essentially it was a machine for government talking points. And that's what we've been witnessing in the last couple of years. That's why we're in this mess right now. There is no democracy without free and independent media. I'm committed to restoring democracy in our country.
I'm going to kind of come at you with a similar question that I asked Mr. Charest around firearms. In 2020, Liberals banned about 1,500 different weapons. Most of them just that look scary. A bunch of them, as I was saying earlier, I was very surprised to learn were not somehow legal. There were anti-aircraft and anti-tank missiles on there, but a bunch of them were just regular hunting and sport shooting rifles that were painted black and maybe just look scary, but were not functionally different than that old Woodstock shotgun that your grandpa left above the cabin door. But they just, if it looked scary, it was banned. And now we've got pending federal legislation that the Liberals have promised it's going to come in the fall. It's obviously going to pass with support of the NDP that will ban the sale and transfer of handguns. I think it's pretty clearly a clear step in the direction of just banning handguns, and maybe that'll go further than even just handguns. If you're Prime Minister, is there any part of that you would not roll back?
I'll roll back all of it. And it's
so I can buy the anti-aircraft missiles.
So I'm definitely going to repeal the regulation,
yeah,
and I'm going to roll back on the legislation that's proposed right now. Keep in mind, so York Centre is regretfully home to one of the highest rates of gun violence in the country, and all of that violence is perpetuated with illegal guns. And so any Liberal suggestion that any of their attempts to, in some cases, even expropriate the property of Canadians would make a dent in crime or any meaningful difference in crime is false. This is an issue that we failed to communicate as Conservatives. Almost all gun crime is committed with illegal guns. Instead of penalizing law-abiding gun owners, I would propose that we actually tackle the issue, and that is the flow, the illegal smuggling of guns across the border. The Canada Border Agency is dysfunctional, much like most federal agencies these days. It's got bad culture, it's poorly managed, and it's underfunded. I'm going to restore a culture of responsibility and professionalism in government, and that would include the Canada Border Services Agency. We need to focus on preventing the flow of illegal guns instead of punishing law-abiding Canadians.
Let's talk a little bit about the Senate, as I've talked with some of the other candidates. We have these things in Alberta we call Senate elections to elect senators in waiting. I think it's the only election in Canada that doesn't actually get you anything. It gets you brownie points, and if there's a Conservative Prime Minister, generally there's a good chance they're gonna appoint you. So I'm going to ask you the same questions I asked Mr. Acheson. If you're Prime Minister, would you commit to appointing elected senators in waiting? And second, would you entertain any kind of broader constitutional reform that would see changes to the Senate? Again, Alberta has a greater population than all 4 Atlantic provinces combined, quite a bit more. But we have just over half the senators of New Brunswick by itself, or Nova Scotia by itself. It is, it's not just not representation by population. It is, there is no logical rhyme or reason to it. So that's a 2-part question.
Yes, to the first part. I'll absolutely respect Alberta's desire to put forth elected senators. But at the same time, Derek, and I think most voters know that I say it like it is, or at least the way I perceive it. And I'm not sure that there's appetite in Canada for constitutional reform, especially given how divided we are as a nation these days, as you need very, very broad consensus. That doesn't mean that I'm not going to have a conversation. I was so pleasantly surprised towards the end of February, where on the Tuesday or a Wednesday, the invocation of the Emergencies Act was on Monday, after the alleged emergency was behind us. And of course, I'm of a very strong view that it was an unlawful invocation of emergencies. But on the Wednesday, the Prime Minister pulled the legislation from the Senate because he didn't have the votes in the Senate. And all of a sudden, a lot of Canadians, including myself, and I'm very interested in these subject matters, realize that we have a house of sober second thought, as John A. Macdonald famously noted, and they were able to make a material difference in the development of our nation's history, as it was about to invoke the successor of the War Measures Act for the first time. So I think that there may be a greater role for the Senate to play. This is regretfully probably more of an academic discussion, which I enjoy very much, but I'd like to have a look at it. I just think that in order for us to have meaningful Senate reform, we need to start healing regional divides. We need to restore the rule of law, something that I think is absent right now from Ottawa. I think we need to reframe the conversation. Like Scott said, if there was just one area of disagreement I'd have with Jean today, is that I don't think that we need a special deal. We're all Canadian. I think it's time to start treating provinces equally. Equalization comes to mind, or the lack thereof. I'd like to have a look at Senate reform, if possible, recognizing that it's very, very difficult.
I don't know if it was Sir John A. Macdonald who coined the frame House of Sober Second Thought, but if so, it's deliciously ironic that he would talk about it being sober. I'm going to have to get into that, but it's a good chance it was
Many
him.
lawyers make that joke after they get called to the bar and go to the bar.
Called to the bar. Speaking of called to the bar, we're gonna be wrapping up here in a second. Actually, I guess we're out of time now. Robin, I'm delighted that you could join us here today. I appreciate you speaking to the Western Standard readers, members, and everyone joining us here. Thank you, and good luck on the campaign trail.
Thank you so much, Derek. Thank you. Thank you.
So I'm about to call you all to the bar too. Mr. Baber, Mr. Charest, Mr. Atchison, on behalf of the Western Standards readers and members and those joining us, thank you for coming and sharing your thoughts with us today. When I'm finally done whinging, I would like to invite the candidates back up to the stage for a group photo and to suffer the abuse of the local Calgary media. I've done my best to be fair and balanced here today. If any of you do not think I have been, I invite you to unsubscribe because the Western Standard refuses to accept government money. That might actually hurt. So before I let you go, though, I'd be remiss if I didn't point out that we have this beautiful room here at the Calgary Petroleum Club today, not because we actually rented it, but because I promised them that we would run up a giant bar tab. I'm not joking. This means that if everyone here today doesn't have at least one or two tastes of the hooch, the poor Western Standard will have to foot the bill for an extra room rental. So this being a room of Alberta Conservatives at the Calgary Stampede, I am confident that you will all do your duty to eat, drink, and be merry. Okay. So thank you all very much for joining us today. Have a great Stampede, and God bless Alberta. Our media landscape is dominated by a few big players, almost all of which are owned by big...
Well, Sheila, first of all, what happened to Leslie Lewis?
Yeah, I was just Googling that. I thought she was going to be there. Maybe I was too busy with like other actual journalism to have, caught that she wasn't going to be there. But it was I was under the impression that she was going to be in attendance in Calgary tonight.
She was in the poster, so I hope she's okay. I remember the Independent Press Gallery debate back, was it 2020, I think it was? she had an earache, and then Peter MacKay, in as you would say, earache solidarity, backed out. So it just became Aaron O'Toole. And who was the other guy? How soon we forget?
I don't know. It doesn't matter.
Derek Sloan. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Anyways, I'm not trying to belittle Derek Sloan. He's a great guy. And at least they showed up and they had a sort of a fireside chat as opposed to a debate.
Yeah.
I don't know, Sheila. I'm not really a fan of that format. It's a sit-down interview more than a debate, I would say. Yeah. And in other circumstances, I'm very happy with that format. I mean, the Mark Levin show, Life, Liberty, and Levin, that comes on Fox on Sunday nights.
Right.
I love that show because it is a one-on-one. Levin is not interrupting his guests, and it's good content. But a debate is not that. A debate is back and forth between candidates challenging each other, God forbid, even interrupting each other. And that's where you see the drama. And, in this kind of a format, I think the audience, Sheila, is deprived of any proverbial knockout blows. And
okay, David, I'm going to interrupt you. We have to go to the Ezra asking
fantastic.
Questions. Let's do it. There's no audio?
No audio, unfortunately, Sheila. But that was indeed Ezra interviewing Jean Charest, and I'd love to know what Ezra was asking him. Hopefully we can take care of that technical difficulty. I see in the monitor he's still speaking with Mr. Charest. And I'm sorry to our viewers that we're having these problems. How about we blame it on Rogers? Oh my goodness!
My Skype is frozen for obvious reasons.
And
what a nightmare.
Sheila, Skype is freezing.
My Skype is frozen? Just what a disaster.
I was just saying, Sheila, I'm going to blame the whole fiasco on Rogers. How about that? Evidently, most of the nation is up in arms because nobody can buy their Starbucks coffee with their phone today because of Rogers' technical difficulties. But I see Jean Charest being scrummed by another journalist, and now the screen is black. And hopefully we can sort out these difficulties. And are you still frozen, Sheila, or are you thawing out?
I think I'm fine. I think I'm pixelated, but I think I'm okay. I'm sure we'll have a video clip of Ezra because it looks like we had a video journalist right there who's likely recording. So I'm sure we'll have a clip of that interaction with Ezra and Jean Charest. And I know we have a whole team just raring to ask these people questions. So I anticipate probably we'll get one or two questions into Jean Charest, hopefully.
Well, Sheila, if you were in Ezra's cowboy boots, what question would you ask Mr. Charest?
Oh, I've got a great question for Mr. Jean Charest. Mr. Jean Charest has said that supporting the truckers' convoy should disqualify you from leadership. Now we're seeing what happens when you support a crackdown on the convoy. Tamara Lich is back in jail for 3 weeks before she gets out. Does Jean Charest, or has Jean Charest changed his opinion on cheering for a crackdown on the convoy?
Great question, and maybe that was indeed the question that Ezra asked Mr. Charest. It's saddening that the issue of Tamara Lich didn't come up during this debate, if you can call it that. This is an incredible issue, I think, Sheila, because at the end of the day, I'm sorry, Tamara Lich, you can argue bail conditions breached allegedly all you want. This is a political prisoner.
Yeah, that's the thing. You can be against the convoy. You can think Tamara Lich is crazy. You can think she's some evil little witch. But no sane, moral, and normal person can look at what's happening to her and saying that is fair treatment under the law. Nobody can say that. The only people who are saying that she should go back to jail are the kind of people who would execute you for your political opinions and gulag you so fast your head would spin because you hold dangerous ideas. She's charged with mischief and mischief-related offenses. She does not have a criminal record. She is a political prisoner at this point, given the fact that her Crown prosecutor is a liberal partisan. This is serious, serious business. And when everybody was saying the convoy's fine, it's free expression, it's political expression, and Jean Charest and Patrick Brown, those were the only two in the leadership race who were saying, yep, let's crack down on these people. Should not what is happening to Tamara Lich and his cheering for it disqualify him now?
And Sheila, correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't there a Canada-wide warrant for her arrest?
Yeah, for a non-com.
Yeah. Isn't that unprecedented? And the police officer in charge of the warrant, I think he was a homicide investigator.
Homicide detective Chris Benson, who I'm reliably informed used to actually at least work on real crimes. I'm not sure he would solve them because I've seen his police work in action, but at least he worked on real actual crimes. He said that he had never been involved in a nationwide warrant for a minor bail infraction.
Yes.
And yet he got one going for Tamara Lich as though this little peaceful Métis grandmother with dangerous ideas, she's public enemy number one. They literally treated her like a serial killer or a child abductor. That's who you reserve these nationwide warrants for, not somebody who took a 3-second interaction picture with someone she's not supposed to talk to in front of her lawyers.
Yeah, and her lawyers were there. See, this is where I cannot connect the dots, Sheila. I thought there was a stipulation if she's with other convoy organizers, she can only be in that room, in that environment, with her legal counsel, and they were there. So
it was their event. It was their
So how is this a breach?
Her lawyers were there.
So how is this a breach, Sheila?
Am I frozen? Oh, I was frozen again for a second. Yeah. Exactly. That's what I can't understand is how this was a breach. And secondarily, I don't understand how a police officer tasked with investigating whether or not this was a breach didn't know that those were lawyers in that room. He didn't even bother to try to identify the lawyers in the room. Who's John Carpe? I don't know. Who's that man right there? I don't know. It's your job to know because you just sent a woman back to jail for 3 weeks. It's your job to know. You got on a plane and flew from Ottawa to Medicine Hat to grab this poor woman and take her back to Ottawa to persecute her again. It's your job to know who she was in that picture with.
100%. And I think that was a missed opportunity that all three of those candidates, because this is big news, a political prisoner, and not for any kind of grounds like attempted terrorism or anything like that, really guilty of a thought crime. Somebody who fronted a peaceful protest. I mean, my goodness, the only laws that were being broken were bylaws, really, when you look at it. And, this should be a red meat issue for Conservatives. And
especially in Alberta. Especially in Alberta. Tamara Lich is an Albertan. Small
Medicine
town
Hat,
Alberta grandmother.
Right?
Medicine Hat, little Medicine Hat grandma is sitting in jail now for 3 weeks. Nobody asks a question about that. That's the first thing I would have asked Jean Charest. Very first thing. You thought the convoy needed to be busted up and everybody needed to be prosecuted. You got what you wanted. Now a woman's in jail for 3 weeks for taking a photo. Do you have any second doubts, any second thoughts about your advocacy for a convoy crackdown? I would have asked that. I hope our team does.
What do you make of the judgment, too, Sheila, that she's behind bars at least until next week? I really thought it was a slam dunk. Maybe this is why I'm not a lawyer, that this was going to be tossed. But no, she's behind bars. I mean, and for what? I think this is egregious. Is this completely politically motivated even by?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, okay.
The judge kept calling the demonstrations. I wouldn't even call it protest.
Okay.
The demonstration in Ottawa, he kept calling it a siege of the capital. I'm like, you were under siege by what? Bouncy castles and street cleanups? That you look like what? And saying that it would draw the administration of justice into disrepute if people like Tamara Lich were allowed to communicate with other convoy organizers. And he said, that, the freedom protests are ongoing, and that could be a problem because it could spark into a occupation, a siege again. And I thought, how clueless are you that you don't realize the reason the freedom protests are ongoing is because you are holding Tamara Lich as a political prisoner. Yeah. They're protesting because you have her. That's why Free Tamara Lich was written on a street in Ottawa, because you're holding Tamara. You're the reason the Freedom Convoy protests are going on, not Tamara.
No, I agree. But moving along, Sheila, what did you make of what was said today? We can't really call it a debate. It was like 3 separate sit-down fireside chats, if you will.
They were making lemons out of lemonade. Obviously, Leslyn Lewis has dropped out somewhere in between. Patrick Brown is off somewhere regrouping for his next crawl out of his political grave. And then Pierre Poilievre has other things to do. So I get why the Western Standard did it this way. What else could you do? Although, I mean, it really was an opportunity to give them a longer opportunity to sort of hash it out and show the differences between the candidates. And I'm not sure I got that.
Well, that's true. But, I'm looking at the notes I took, and I have to say I'm not a fan of a red Tory like Charest, but he had a couple of good points. And one was the healthcare reform, where he really ventured into what's known as third rail territory when it comes to this file. And that is the idea of reforming the Health Care Act so that there could be private health care. And that is something I've long supported, Sheila. I've done a lot of reading on healthcare systems around the world, and I think we might have discussed this before. I think when you look to Europe, the 2 countries that really get it right are France and Germany. And it's a hybrid system. It's private and public. And it's win-win, despite the historical unionists in Canada that will, talk about our sacred cow healthcare system going the route.
And you know what? It's anti-Americanism. That's what.
They
don't actually care about healthcare. It's we have this thing that's different, and we think we're better than the Americans. Look at us.
But you know what? I don't think the American system is a utopia either, Sheila. But what I'm getting at is that if you look at France and Germany, if you don't have the funds for healthcare, no problem. You're going to go into the public system. Yes, much like Canada, there is going to be a longer line. But think about this. If there are people ahead of you who do have money and can go to a private system, they go out of the line, you go up a notch. You get your healthcare faster in the public system. Why is this so demonized and vilified by the left? Because for the amount of money we're putting into healthcare, and by the way, when we talk about healthcare isn't working, that soundbite from Tonight in 2022, you could have plucked that from 1982, 1972. It's 'twas ever thus. And here is a tangible solution, and I think Jean Charest is on the right track. And good for him for having the bravery to say that.
Now, Aitchison said very similar things. He said, and he took it one step further. He basically said we need to get the government out of dairy and the
supply
quota
management.
System.
Yes.
He said, no supply management. That's great. It adds to inflation to the consumer. Although I'm going to get emails from dairy farmers, I'm sure. But I'm a non-quota farmer, so I don't know. It just falls on deaf ears over here. So don't just save your typing. He also talked about a mix of private healthcare, which I thought was great. Now, Olivia informs me in my ear that we actually have a clip of Celine Gallus asking Roman Baber I think, a prickly question, and I'm very excited to see this.
Let's check it out.
Hi, Mr. Babbitt. Are trans women? Should trans women be able to compete in women's sports, go into women's places like bathrooms, change rooms, or even women's prisons?
So I certainly think that safety is an issue. I'm on record saying that I very much respect people's choices and how they choose to lead their lives. And government certainly shouldn't be telling people how to lead their lives, and respect how people want to be treated. I think that goes to individual dignity. What I would like to see is I'd like to depoliticize the classroom, and I certainly think that the classroom should be age appropriate. And when safety is a concern, safety should certainly be addressed.
With regards to how
Okay, so he didn't exactly answer her question.
Yeah.
She asked, are trans women women? But he also at the same time he didn't answer the question, but at least he said, I don't think the government should tell you how to live your life. And when we're talking to kids about this stuff, it needs to be age appropriate, which is, I guess, 30% of the way there to a good answer.
Yeah, indeed, Sheila, and I would have added on to the question, because at the end of the day, and we've had this discussion before, it is indeed egregious. You have biological males who have transitioned, competing against real women, and we see the results. I mean, look no further than Liar Thomas in the NCAA swimming division. But at the end of the day, sports is fun and games. What I'm really concerned with is the Justin Trudeau amendment to the prison system, where you have a male convict say, hey, I'm a female, without going through hormone therapy, without slicing and dicing surgically your genitalia. And suddenly, male offenders, are in female penitentiaries, and guess what? Guess who they are bullying once they are behind bars because of their inherent strength advantage. How could anyone avoid a clear-cut answer as that, saying, no, if you're a man, you're in the male penitentiary, and if you're in a female, you're in the female penitentiary, period. No, let's get away from any kind of nuance here. And I agree with you, Sheila. That answer was a little too nuanced for my liking.
Yeah. I mean, it's a really easy question,
Yeah.
I think. And I think, I used to think, up until we just saw that sort of question fall flat in front of him, I used to think that Roman Baber was not scared of political correctness. I actually recall him saying something very similar to Derek Fildebrandt about 20 minutes ago. So when we had the opportunity to show us what he believes in practice, he struggled.
Yeah, that was a bit of a fumble there, and I'm mystified as to the reasons why. But I think what we were talking about before we cut over to Celine's question was supply management. And, really, at the end of the day, how can any conservative who believes in a free market economy say, oh, yeah, I believe in a free market economy, except for 4 specific industries, dairy, eggs, turkey, and chicken. Those are all supply managed commodities. How can you be a free market absolutist and go, oh, except for these 4? And by the way, Sheila, supply management dates back to the early 70s. It was the Pierre Trudeau Liberals that are responsible for this system. Why would you want to defend that?
I don't know. Because the dairy lobby is very powerful. I mean, it gave us Andrew Scheer. And so you don't want to anger them. But at the same time, when we see skyrocketing inflation in the grocery store,
right,
this is one thing that price fixes, and it punishes the poor the most. And as conservatives, we don't believe in handouts, but boy, we need to get out of the way. And so before you wander off into a tangerine, as you would say, we do have an audio recording because remember, people are here for our debate coverage. So let's talk about that. Okay. We have a audio recording of Ezra's questions to Sheree. So we saw Ezra answering a question, and we saw him using his phone as a microphone. Yeah. So we have the audio of that. So we'll just roll that.
Mr. Sheree, how you doing? Welcome, West.
Thank you very much.
Can I ask you a question about fake news and disinformation? Justin Trudeau talks about it a lot, and he suggests that government has a role in identifying misinformation and disinformation and regulating it somehow. Do you believe that's something that the government should do, or do you think one man's fake news is another man's truth?
I don't know how you do that. That's a challenge. I don't know how you distinguish all the nuances and the shades of information to make a ruling or a decision. I don't know who makes that. So, we live in a world where we're just going to have to work hard to educate people to be as critical as they can and have a critical mind on the information they receive.
Quick follow-up. One of Trudeau's proposals with Minister Rodriguez would alter the algorithm for Facebook or Google to boost content that the government prefers. Could be Canadian content, could be qualified news organizations. I think the implication is it would suppress other things. How do you feel about that algorithm change proposed by the minister?
Well, I'm not sure what they're talking about, and I don't understand what they're talking about. And I don't think they should be trying to engineer things that they don't understand or that they know what they're talking about.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Well, there you go. And that's kind of consistent with what he was saying to Derek Hildebrandt when he was asked the question about media bailouts. Sheila, Charest said he finds it difficult to accept the federal government funding the media, and he would not fund the press. That's music to my ears because virtually every mainstream media organization is getting subsidized right now. And I'll tell you, once upon a time in the early 80s when I was a journalism student at Ryerson, or whatever Ryerson is called these days.
University X?
Yes. Oh, University X. And then I went to, Metropolitan University of... It sounds like a subway station now.
Right.
And maybe that's a good name for it. So just stay on the subway, kids, and keep, going to another institution.
Go right past it.
Yeah. Just keep going north. I'm thinking of my, old school journalism professors back then who were hypersensitive about things, as they should be when you're in the media, of pertaining to conflict of interest, Sheila. And the very idea that an entity like the federal government, and here in Ontario even the provincial government, Doug Ford giving the Torstar Corporation a $500 million a year gambling license to keep them afloat, the idea that you'd be covering the federal government and the provincial government and yet being paid by them. In fact, your financial survival depends on them. That is the very definition of a conflict of interest. And I don't know how any journalist, any owner of a media company can look at you with a straight face and say, oh, no, that doesn't have any role in our reporting. Of course it does.
Yeah, of course it does. I'm just pulling up the Blacklock's article about this today, and I didn't realize, or maybe I did at the time, but it sort of got lost in the constant shuffle of my criticism of this sort of stuff. But did you realize the timeline of the media bailout? So it's set to expire in 2 years, in March of 2024. And so from the time it was introduced to the time it would expire, that would have been the entire term of Justin Trudeau's government had he not had that pandemic re-election. Yeah. And so he thought, okay, I've got 4 years of my term to buy these people off, then it'll expire. So they know as I'm running into the election again, they better give me good coverage if they want this back again. So, and then when you look at the numbers from this is from the Department of Heritage. So this is their own data. It says the department said it knew of the hiring of 342 journalists, but only because their wages were subsidized 100% under a $50 million local journalism initiative. And this is my favorite part. The loss of even one job is a tragedy, Heritage Minister Pablo Rodriguez earlier told reporters. I wish he felt that way about all the layoffs in the oil patch under Justin Trudeau in 2015 and Rachel Notley in 2015. And every time they cancel a pipeline, they don't really seem to care about those jobs. Those are not tragedies. Those are just another body on the bonfire of progressivism. But journalists, and there's like some of this local journalism garbage. Yeah. When you are, for me, like I'm reading the local Sherwood Park News or the Fort Saskatchewan Record, and I'm like, who around these parts are even remotely interested in all this climate change journalism that's stuck in my local newspaper? Well, it's because some of these grants are tied to you have to write climate change stuff, which is a pure liberal government agenda policy. And you're like, why is this garbage in my local newspaper? Nobody cares about this. We care about when the Combine Smash 'em Up Derby is in Lamont. We want to know when the Bullarama is. I need to know when the garage sales are. That's the kind of stuff that we care about. Not the climate change garbage, but it is because that newspaper hired a journalist to do it because that journalist was fully funded by the feds to do it.
You know what, Sheila, what you just said is fascinating because it is in a way a form of compelled speech, much like they tried to mandate on Pastor Artur Pawlowski, isn't it? That we're going to give you this grant to keep you afloat, but there's a hitch. Can you do a climate change article every once in a while? You know, because we're very big on that agenda. And I guess these journalistic jabronis are going, yes, boss, whatever you say.
Yeah. I mean, so then there's the QCJO. So that's the Qualified Canadian Journalist Organization, which is the government who says, even though the charter says that we can't say if you're a journalist or not, you're definitely a journalist and you're not a journalist. And so there's certain benefits attached to that. And we did not qualify, though we went through the process of applying. Not because we wanted government bailouts. We would never take that money anyways. We don't take their subsidies. We don't take their grants. That's not why we went through the process. We went through the process to prove that we were being treated unfairly under the tax structure. Because if you qualify for that, we are eligible for 15% subscriber tax credits, which means the people who subscribe to us by virtue of being conservative and consuming conservative news, you're being treated unfairly under the tax law. Because if you signed up for a subscription to the Globe and Mail, I don't know why you'd do that. I guess you got money to burn. But if you did, you would get a 15% rebate on your subscription, a tax credit. But if you subscribe at rebelnewsplus.com, you just do it because you're cheering for us to live and you like the work that we do. But you are not being treated fairly under the tax structure because you're conservative, or at least because you're interested in hearing the other side of the story.
Sheila, I'm also extremely uncomfortable that the bureaucratic pit bull going after this file is the taxman. It's the CRA. If there's any part of the bureaucracy that should be completely apolitical, it is the Canada Revenue Agency. They have the power to freeze accounts. They can do very bad financial things to you. I'd rather be in trouble with the mob than the CRA, Sheila. And it's disheartening to see Trudeau using this bureaucracy as it's like I said, it's watchdog. I mean, you would think, wouldn't this come under the bailiwick of the CRTC?
You would think.
Yeah.
Now, I think we have Ezra on the line from the event in Calgary. So let's bring him on, please.
Hey, Ezra, how are you doing there?
Hi, Sheila and David. Great. How are you doing? Can you hear me okay?
We can indeed.
Yeah,
and we saw your questions to Jean Charest. By the way, Ezra, right off the hopper, what happened to Leslie Lewis? Have you heard anything on the ground there?
Yeah, she didn't come. And of course, Pierre Poilievre chose not to come. And Patrick Brown was not allowed to come. So listen, I'm grateful to the Western Standard for hosting the event. It was nice to be here. I was very proud to see all our rebel journalists in full effect. And there were a lot of Western Standard journalists too. They're coming along nicely. So it was a good exercise. But because Pierre Poilievre wasn't here and Leslie Lewis helped take some of the air out of the balloon by not being here too, it was a little bit anticlimactic.
Yes.
However, I enjoyed meeting Jean Charest, and I liked my question to him, if I may. I thought it was something that's on my mind and something that he could have answered either way. He wasn't resolute. I don't think Jean Charest is a Bible thumping or like Bible thumping is the wrong word. Like he's not a guy who says, and this is my point. Like he's always slightly moderate or slightly, he leaves a tiny bit of wiggle room is what I mean. He's not adamant.
Yeah.
But his answer I think was good. He said, how would you do that? Who would be the judges? I'm not really for government deciding what is or isn't fake news. So I thought that was good because it would have been easy in this age to say, yeah, I'm worried about fake news. I'm worried about disinformation. It's corroding our democracy. Government has a duty to protect democracy. Like that's the line that is being pushed so hard. So I'm glad I asked the question, and I thought his answer was positive.
And Ezra,
Yeah, I think his answer went to the heart of the issue.
Yep.
Who decides? Who decides what's misinformation? The Justin Trudeau government that kept telling us wear masks, don't wear masks. If you close the border, it's racist.
Yeah.
You know.
And Ezra also, at least he did answer your questions. He did not pull a Justin Trudeau or a Jagmeet Singh at the leadership debates where they said to our reporters, shamefully, I might add, I do not take questions from Rebel News, even though we had a federal court order getting us in there, which was absolutely disgraceful.
Yeah, and I mean, first of all, Jean Charest, maybe because he is a red Tory, his bona fides are not such that anyone would say, oh, are you a right wing? So maybe he's immune to that. Maybe he just doesn't care. But I think genuinely that don't talk to Rebel News is a creation of the Toronto, Ottawa media clique. Yes. And I genuinely think Jean Charest has not been in that world for decades. He was in the Quebec media clique and Quebec life. And sure, he had some dealings in Ottawa, but that whole don't talk to him. That's a very Ottawa, Parliament Hill, Toronto snobby thing that should not normally infect politicians unless they're trying to be in with the cool kids. Yeah. So the fact that Jean Charest talked to me and gave, I thought, a good answer, and talked to the Western Standard and came out here, I think it's good. And again, I say I don't agree with everything Jean Charest says. He's too liberal for me. I thought his answer to my question was solid. And he was just a normal adult taking a normal and concise question. Shame on any conservative politician who's too afraid to talk to Rebel News. And I don't say that out of self-interest, because we cover these guys whether or not they talk to us. I mean, Trudeau hasn't given us an interview in many years. That doesn't stop us from covering him. Yep. But any conservative who wouldn't talk to Rebel News, or who wouldn't talk to Western Standard, or who wouldn't talk to True North, or other little conservative citizen journalists, that is a sign that he is weak and afraid of the mob, afraid of the media being mean to him. And it's not that I care that Jean Charest talks to me or to Western Standard. It's that is a proxy for how easily pushed around are you? How easily are you made into a conformist? So it's a low bar, but he passed it.
Great points, Ezra.
Well, and I think too, it's a missed opportunity. You asked a good question, he gave a good answer, and here I am, a Jean Charest skeptic, saying, yeah, actually he did a good job. So it's a huge missed opportunity when they dodge our questions, because you might actually change a conservative's mind about you.
Yeah, I listened to the questions that our people put. There was a question about China. Is it a ally, a competitor, or an enemy? Okay, that's an interesting question that I think, I think a lot of Canadians think about China a lot these days. And by the way, I think we didn't put that question to Jean Charest, but I think that's a better question than just asking him for the 20th time about his work for Huawei. He's already asked and answered that, and you could ask him again, but how about ask him something new? Now, that was a question to Roman Baber, and again, interesting answer from him, referring to his background growing up in the Soviet Union. What else did we ask? We asked the transgender question.
Yes.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, Celine asked the transgender question, and I thought that was beyond the question itself, a good test of what can Roman Baber walk the walk when he talks the talk, because he says he's not scared of cancel culture. So Celine asked him a question that could put him in the center of cancel culture, and I think we only got about 30% of the way there to an adequate response to the question she asked.
Right. He said, my emphasis on don't pick on people and make sure everyone's safe. Okay, that goes to maybe don't put, like, you have to extrapolate from that he means don't put males in women's prisons, which happens right now. But it doesn't go, but safety isn't the only thing. For example, Leah
Fairness.
Thomas, the transgender, fairness. So for example, when you have transgender athletes crushing it in women's tournaments, like in swimming, Leah Thomas, there's no safety risk to the girls that Leah Thomas is destroying in that competition. There's no safety risk. It's just destroying women's sport and girls' sport and being unfair and unsportsmanlike and ruining athletics for millions of women and girls. So there's no safety aspect. It's an unfairness aspect, and forcing people to pretend it's fair is a form of thought control that is Soviet. But I'd say you're right. I think his answer went 30% of the way there.
And Ezra, tell me, before you came on, Sheila and I were chatting about Tamara Lich and how we were disappointed that this issue never came up in the fireside chats. If you think of a red meat issue for Conservatives, it's the fact that this...
In Alberta.
Yeah, especially in Alberta, that this Métis grandmother is behind bars at least until next week.
Yeah.
As basic, well, let's call it what it is, for being, she's a political prisoner.
Yeah.
Well, and David, to interrupt, it goes to a broader issue of the politicization of our systems.
Yes.
It touches on the fact that we've got a liberal partisan prosecutor doing Trudeau's bidding. Then a little further east, we've got a problem with the Nova Scotia inquiry there, with the RCMP being used as a political tool on behalf of the government. So It's a broader issue, and I'm disappointed we didn't hear anything about that.
Yeah. I think that Adam Sos asked a question about Tamara. So maybe you didn't catch that question, but it was afterwards in the scrum. Yeah, I mean, listen, that issue is very dear to our heart at Rebel News. We certainly covered the trucker convoy very closely, and we've covered Tamara Lich's persecution, which continues outrageously. I think it's a big problem. I like Roman Baber, and he said he loves the law. He's a lawyer. If I had another question for him, I would have said, do you think it's a problem that not a single judge in this country in 2 years has used the charter to stop this civil liberties bonfire? Like it didn't stop the quarantine hotels at airports, didn't stop the curfew in Montreal, didn't stop the you can't go to church, didn't stop the you can't have more than X number of people in your home, didn't stop the we're going to regulate your funerals. Like, seriously, 2 years, and not a single judge said, yeah, maybe some of this violates our civil liberties.
Yeah.
Like, is that not proof that we don't actually have civil liberties, that it's all been a con, and the charter is an essential Canadian value? Sure hasn't been these last 2 years. I would like people to tackle that. And I don't know. Listen, I'm glad of the event. It was sort of lukewarm without some of the competitors, but for those people who were here, I think it was a good gathering. It's nice to be together.
Well, Ezra, with any debate, or this, you could call this a quasi-debate, I suppose, you always have to pick out who was the clear-cut winner and who was the clear-cut loser. You were ringside, my friend. How would you grade the three?
Well,
David.
I like Roman Baber because I like what he says. So I liked what he said the best. I thought he was the clearest, the most freedom-oriented. I'm not 100% on all fours with him, but I would love it if he was prime minister. I think he would be a very principled man, but he's just not going to be prime minister. He was an MPP, a provincial politician in one district in Toronto. he's grown his reputation, but he's not going to win. Scott Aitchison, I felt was good guy, I'm sure, but he's a bit of a tourist in this competition. Jean Charest, I think he's affable. I mean, sometimes he really butts heads with Pierre Poilievre, but he seemed happy to be in Calgary. He has a jovial and chatty personality that is disarming. He's not harsh or acidic, and I think Westerners and Calgarians sort of like it when Quebecers come to Calgary and say nice things to Calgary, like Canada only succeeds when Alberta succeeds. I mean, Westerners sort of like that. So, although I disagree with Jean Charest, say again he's too liberal for my taste. How can you say he didn't win by coming to Calgary, holding his own, giving thoughtful answers? Again, you might disagree with them. And I'm glad he was here. So my answer is the winner of this contest, in my view, is going to be Pierre Poilievre. I don't think it's going to be much of a contest with Patrick Brown gone. Jean Charest, I don't think is going to win. I just don't think he's got the horsepower, but I'm glad he ran. And Roman Baber, I hope he does run for the MP in the district I happen to live in Toronto. I hope he does run.
He's going to make a great justice minister.
Well, that's exactly right. You know what? Not since Jody Wilson-Raybould has anyone been able to say that. And she was ideologically too left-wing anyways. She was ethical, but she had a radical left-wing view of the law. It would be amazing if Roman Baber was the MP for, I think York Centre is the name of the riding. And I think his conduct in this campaign has convinced a lot of people in the party that he is a serious policy man. And to have him as justice minister would have someone who understands firsthand what the lack of civil liberties is like. And maybe we would see a little bit of a freedom ideology spread throughout the justice system, because Lord knows we've had it the opposite for the last 2 years.
By the way, Ezra, who is your MP in your riding in which you live?
Well, my MP is named Yara Sachs.
Oh,
just
honk,
a
honk.
token
Honk, honk,
candidate.
honk.
Yeah, the one who actually claimed that honk honk is like a code for Heil Hitler. Because they both sound with the huh sound. And you know what? I'm a Jew and I don't like anti-Semitism, and I'm on the lookout for it. But it's absolutely discrediting when you say honk honk. That horn was a Nazi symbol. You make yourself look like a clown whose only purpose is to smear Trudeau's enemies as anti-Semites, and it's the boy crying wolf. If you say honk honk is proof of anti-Semitism, no one will ever believe you again. You're a laughing stock. And so what happens one day when there really is anti-Semitism or a Nazi? Everyone says, "Oh, you're the fool who thought honk honk really meant Heil Hitler because of the huh sound." I mean, if you listen to a horn, it doesn't actually say honk. Like, I don't know if you've ever heard your horn. It sounds like me or honk. It doesn't actually say honk.
Yeah.
Honk. There's a few words that are onomatopoeic, like buzz.
Yeah.
The word buzz sounds like a buzz.
Well, Ezra, I got to tell you.
Honk, honk. It's not how honking sounds.
Yeah, in that case, Roman Baber is definitely an upgrade for your riding. Should he run as an MP?
Well, listen, an empty chair, an empty, unfilled seat is an upgrade in that riding. I'm deeply embarrassed by the MP, but you know what? It's Toronto. What are you going to do? They're the masochists, and they love the quality government that the Liberal Party's giving them, from the meltdown at Pearson Airport to the 3-day camp out. Oh, you're going camping? No. I just mean picking up my passport. We're calling it a camping trip because we're staying in tents for 3 days because Trudeau doesn't want to. More than half of the passport staff in Canada are still working at home because of COVID. Gee, I wonder if that has anything to do with the fact that it's now taking months to get your passport. But hey, Toronto voted for it, and they're getting it good and hard.
Oh, but come on, Ezra, let's be fair. Let's give credit where credit is due. The passport people have put out a procurement order for chairs, so at least people are comfortable as they wait 72 hours for their passport.
Yeah, exactly right. Well, listen, you guys, thank you again for hosting the live stream, and I enjoyed being in the field. I love seeing our talent in action. And I'm going to sign off because I got to record something, run around and do some stuff out here. But I appreciate you working so hard. and having such a long live stream too.
Well, thank you so much, Ezra, and thank you for your insight. It was wonderful.
Cheers. Bye, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, boss.
Well, there you go, Sheila. I guess any final thoughts now that this one is over and done with? You're right. It's sad that Poilievre couldn't make it. I think it was, as you mentioned at the top of the show, a missed opportunity for him being in Calgary. He would have been embraced, especially with the policies. And still not sure what happened to Leslyn Lewis, but it is what it is, I guess. And I'm just not a fan of this kind of, well, you can't even call it a debate. It was like 3 separate little fireside chats. It, bordered on boring in some instances. Your final thought, Sheila?
I would have preferred to have seen them arguing it out on the podium.
Yes.
However, our friends at Western Standard, I think, pulled this one out of the fire. It was canceled, then it wasn't, then they had people drop out, and then they had people kick out.
I'm not blaming them. I'm not blaming them.
I think given what they had, lemons into lemonade, I think they did a great job. In fact, I will not be as kind as Ezra to Jean Charest, and I will say the winners of this really are our friends at the Western Standard for pulling this thing off with all the moving pieces and all the disasters and all the changes. I think they gave Calgarians something, which is more than nothing. And like I said, the debate had been canceled, then it wasn't, and then then there's the Brown scandal. You're trying to put stuff together. So I think they did a great job in spite of themselves. But yeah, I would like to have seen, I don't know, maybe I just like the arguing. And I would like to have seen more of that.
I agree. Well, don't you worry, Sheila. Plenty of arguing to come in the days, weeks, and months ahead as we get closer and closer till September 10th. Can't wait for that. Well, folks, I want to thank you all for tuning into our live.
We've got one chat. Hang on, we've got one chat. And I think we're also going to go out on a clip from Adam. Adam got a question in, so we'll if people stick around after we sign off, they'll see Adam's clip.
Excellent.
His question. So we've got one chat. Okay, it's from Coyote Wares. Gives us $1. I don't know what Coyote Wares sells. I'm going to click on it first before self-reliance and emergency supplies. Perfect. Anyway, that's great. So owner of Coyote Wares here at coyotewares.com. They're offering Rebel News viewers 10% off all products for a limited time. Use code REBEL, REBEL, for your discount. So that's neat. And you know what? Smart use of your advertising dollars, by the way. Kicking in $1 on a super chat so I have to read a promo on air for you. Well done, friend, but this is what they sell.
Forget about coyotes, Sheila. I think that's called guerrilla marketing, and I'm not adverse to it.
I like the hustle. Good for you guys.
Yep. And where, by the way, where is Coyote Wear based in,
Is
Sheila?
that in Calgary?
Okay.
I think it might be in Calgary. Am I wrong? Doesn't say.
I'm sure they have an online site. Well, wherever they are,
Yeah,
I'll
it's
pop
online.
in for a visit once the airports get functioning, which will be sometime near Halloween, we understand.
Are they American?
Oh, really?
Are they American? I don't know.
Oh.
America First Small Business. Well.
That sounds like they're U.S. based. Well, I retract what I just said. Not that I'm against anything American. It's just that as a Canadian who's unvaxxed, I'm landlocked. I can't go to the United States of America. Not yet.
Okay, this stuff, all orders are shipped out fast, and they include 3-day free shipping. Now, I don't know if that's 3-day free shipping to your Canuck friends, Coyote Wares. But anyways, I think we spent enough time on this. You only gave us $1. This is all you get.
He got his money's worth, that's for sure.
He sure
folks, thank you so much for tuning in. My thank you again to my co-host Sheila Gunn-Reid, and of course, super producers Olivia and Efron at the board. I want to wish everybody a wonderful summer weekend. It is too short a season in Canada, summer, isn't it, folks? So enjoy yourself. And as always, stay sane.
What's your stance on the energy transition and net zero ambitions?
So I think that has gone by the wayside. I don't think that we're going to see that to fruition, nor do I think that we need to. I don't think that taxing Sally $10 at the gas pump is going to affect the climate. Instead, what I think we should be doing is we should allow Canadians to unlock our natural resources. It's how I propose to unify our country around this message of economic opportunity through natural resources. But I'm not sure, even if you were to cut all emissions, that in Canada, which is responsible for less than 1.5% of all global emissions, that would make any material difference. So I propose that we take this in a different direction and allow us to develop our natural resources.
And do you regard China as an ally, a competitor, or an enemy?
So I want to be very clear on China. I was raised in a communist regime, and I think that we should not be afraid to confront evil. And you look at what's happening in China today, they are still locking down millions of healthy people. I think that, when we say never again, and the international community should rally in defense of Chinese Muslims that are being segregated into labor camps. And also, China continues to destabilize the world, steal our intellectual property, probably meddle in our elections. I think that it's time for the international community to show some moral clarity on China and be resolute and probably change course.
Speaking of segregating people, Tamara Lich was hauled away and arrested ultimately for taking a photo with a political opponent of Justin Trudeau. What do you make of the authoritarian trend in judicial processes as of late in Canada, particularly in the case of Tamara Lich?
So I think it's no secret that I'm a very big supporter of the freedom movement and the truckers movement. I believe that if there was any discussion of any unlawful conduct, then that could have been properly subjected to municipal bylaws or Highway Traffic Act. However, recognizing that I'm a member of the bar, I'm not allowed to criticize the judicial process. I have to presume that it is fair and independent, and I will remain as such. I will not comment on an individual case, on a criminal case that is before the court for adjudication.
So then, broadly speaking, would you say, though, that you do have concerns about some of the prosecution without getting into a specific case?
I would say that, look, I'm a very big proponent of the rule of law. When the rule of law is out the window, then when our democracy is at risk, you can't really have certainty in law or in anything, whether it's the economy or anything else. And so I think that it's very, very important that we have confidence in our institutions. And that would mean that I'd have a very, very difficult time believing that anyone could be regarded differently before the law because of their political views or political activity. I'm not speaking about Ms. Lich in particular. I'm saying generally. And regretfully, if we've seen any erosion of the rule of law that's coming out of Ottawa, primarily starting with the unlawful, in my view, invocation of the Emergencies Act, I'll leave it at that. Thank you, everyone.